Xiao Meng took the chicken wing and cupped his hands respectfully toward Bufang, full of gratitude. Anai Yan's eyes lit up. She stared at Bufang and shouted, "I want one too!" Bufang glanced at Anai Yan and the corners of his mouth twitched. With a flip of the dragon bone kitchen knife, the buttocks of the blood phoenix chicken were cut off. With a light toss, the buttocks of the blood phoenix chicken fell into Anai Yan's porcelain bowl. "What is this? Chicken butt?" Anai Yan's pretty face immediately stiffened. How infuriating! She rolled her beautiful eyes and glared at Bufang, but did not say anything. The buttocks of a chicken can beautify and nourish one's skin. The effect of the chicken butt of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup is naturally even more obvious, Bufang earnestly said. "Owner Bu, give me a serving as well." Ji Qingxue was already tempted by the aroma that permeated the air. The aroma of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was extraordinary. He had eaten Bufang's dishes in the past and naturally knew that the dishes made by Bufang were definitely of the highest quality. How could the taste be bad? After dividing up the blood phoenix chicken, Bufang put away the dragon bone kitchen knife. Everyone was eating with relish. There was a lingering fragrance in their mouths as the shiny oil densely covered their mouths. After Duan Yun entered the imperial city, he followed the aroma and found Fong Fong's little store. The intoxicating aroma spread throughout the entire city. Duan Yun found it without spending much effort. When he arrived at the entrance of the store, he saw the ruins left behind by the battle. The sharp true energy that permeated the air caused Duan Yun's mind to slightly tremble. It was obvious that an extremely terrifying battle had just taken place here. Moreover, with Duan Yun's experience, he could clearly feel the somewhat chaotic pressure of heaven and earth in the air. There was actually someone controlling the pressure of heaven and earth? Could it be that a battle between divine physique echelon experts had just taken place in the imperial city? The first stage of the 10th grade divine realm was the divine physique echelon. A battle between those realms. How could it happen in such a small place? He walked into the store and, as he expected, saw Bufang. He wanted to say something, but he was attracted by the aroma that permeated the air. He looked at the group of people around him who were eating with relish and making slurping sounds from time to time. Duan Yun could not resist the temptation and also ordered a serving. Essence crystals were naturally nothing to him. After drinking a mouthful of soup, he completely forgot about the matter that he wanted to tell Bufang. Delicious. It tasted even better than the alchemy fire roasted meat. Duan Yun had never tasted such a delicious dish. He was suddenly moved. Wait a minute. This dish couldn't have been cooked with a heaven and earth obsidian flame, right? Duan Yun subconsciously asked as he recalled Bufang's annoying personality. However, Bufang did not hide anything and directly nodded. Tears streamed down Duan Yun's cheek. As expected, this fellow was so extravagant as to use a heaven and earth obsidian flame to cook. That was the flame that all alchemists dreamed of. You're using that kind of heaven and earth treasure to cook? Didn't he know that it was a reckless waste of a treasure? Duan Ling felt a wave of suffocation in his heart. He also felt sorry for the heaven and earth obsidian flame. Previously, he was still feeling sorry for his alchemy fire, but he did not expect that compared to the heaven and earth obsidian flame, his alchemy fire was actually quite lucky. Owner Bu, I came here this time not only to taste your dish, but also to tell you a piece of bad news. Duan Yun grabbed a large piece of meat and chewed on it. He suddenly said, "The news that a heaven and earth obsidian flame has appeared in the southern region will spread quickly. Not long after, the powerful sect that has always regarded the southern region as a training ground will receive this news. They will definitely send people over. When that time comes, the people they send over will definitely have terrifying cultivation levels." Duan Yun reminded them and continued to chew on the large piece of meat. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu furrowed their brows, feeling a little fearful. At their level, they naturally knew how insignificant the southern region was. The sect that Duan Yun mentioned was the Grand Baron sect. It was a powerful sect that regarded the southern region as a training ground for its disciples. It was an enormous power with terrifying strength. For the disciples of the Grand Baron sect, the training ground was indeed not dangerous. However, a heaven and earth obsidian flame like the 10,000 bestial flames had appeared in a mere training ground. How could they let it go? A heaven and earth obsidian flame was something that could only be chanced upon. When the time came, the Grand Baron sect would definitely send experts to look for Bu Fang and ask for the 10,000 bestial flames. The Supreme Elder also mentioned this matter to Bu Fang, but Bu Fang didn't pay much attention to it. He had already eaten the 10,000 bestial flames, and it already belonged to him. How could he possibly spit it out? Bei Gongming led a few injured Grand Baron sect disciples through the dense forest of the 100,000 mountains. His complexion was extremely unsightly. His heart was filled with unwillingness, depression, and an intense sense of helplessness and regret. Facing the 10,000 bestial flames and the heaven and earth obsidian flame, it would be a lie if he wasn't tempted. Originally, he thought that he could easily sweep away all the powers in the training ground and snatch the 10,000 bestial flames. However, he never imagined that there would be so many terrifying experts in this remote place. Existences that were half a step into the divine realm. A few pots made him unable to wake up for a long time, and strange existences that could even eat the heaven and earth obsidian flame. Because of these reasons, he had missed the opportunity to obtain the heaven and earth obsidian flame. His heart ached. The group of people slowly walked through the serene and dense forest. Soon, they walked out of the dense forest and arrived at a huge valley. A waterfall poured down like a silver river, emitting deafening rumbling sounds. The valley was filled with dense heaven and earth spirit energy. In the middle of the valley there was a desolate palace. There were many figures walking in front of the palace. These figures were all wearing the same clothes and emitted extremely terrifying auras. There were several figures sitting cross-legged in the palace. One of them seemed to have sensed Bei Gongming's presence, and slowly opened his eyes. It was as if there was a golden radiance bursting out from his eyes. It was so dense that it seemed as if it wanted to illuminate everything. Bei Gongming, who had just stepped into the palace, suddenly felt his heart tremble. It was as if he was being watched by an invisible eye. Deacon Feng, I have an urgent news to report. Bei Gongming really didn't want to divulge the information about the heaven and earth obsidian flame. However, he couldn't obtain it with his current strength. Conflicted, he still chose to divulge it. Chapter 376. What news? The middle-aged man slowly opened his eyes. There seemed to be a radiance circulating in his eyes as he gazed at Bei Gongming, causing Bei Gongming's heart to tremble. It was a pair of eyes that seemed to be able to see through one's thoughts. This pair of eyes made Bei Gongming's hair stand on end. Executive Feng was an expert sent by the Grand Baron sect to oversee the training grounds. He was in charge of Bei Gongming's team. His cultivation was extremely powerful. Bei Gongming, who was at the middle stage of the Supreme Being realm, didn't even have the courage to look him in the eye. Executive Feng, I discovered a heaven and earth obsidian flame in the training ground. Bei Gongming recalled how he had been humiliated by a group of country bumpkins. He felt a surge of anger in his heart. With his cultivation, he definitely wouldn't be able to get back at them. The kid who snatched the heaven and earth obsidian flame seemed to have an extremely powerful puppet. That puppet could fight against 5 supreme beings at once. If he went up alone, he would definitely be beaten up. Bei Gongming wasn't a fool. He sighed and told him the truth. Executive Feng's lazy gaze suddenly froze when he heard Bei Gongming's words. His sharp gaze was like a sharp longsword. In an instant it seemed as though it was going to pierce Bei Gongming's heart. Bei Gongming's whole body trembled. What did you say? A heaven and earth obsidian flame appeared in the training grounds? Executive Feng's voice was filled with a sense of bewilderment. This training ground couldn't even produce a divine physique echelon cultivator. How could a heaven and earth obsidian flame be produced? Are you the fool or am I? Executive Feng looked at Bei Gongming as though he was looking at a fool. Bei Gongming was dumbfounded. Executive Feng actually didn't believe him? He hurriedly told Executive Feng everything that happened in the 100,000 Mountains. After listening to Bei Gongming's story, Executive Feng's face became gloomy. You said that half of the team died because of a heaven and earth obsidian flame? Executive Feng's voice was ice cold. He looked at Bei Gongming, who felt a chill run down his spine. As the leader of the team, he was in charge of Bei Gongming's team. Now, Bei Gongming had actually run over to tell him that half of the team had died? This responsibility was completely on his head, and the sect would also demand an explanation from him. Executive Feng's cold and gloomy expression seemed to have caused the surrounding experts to slowly open their eyes. Astonished, they swept their gazes over where he was at. Executive Feng nodded his head at the few of them, then pulled Bei Gongming out of the central region of the Great Hall. This hall was the gathering place of the Grand Baron's sect in the training grounds. Every time the disciples were sent to the training grounds, they would have to return to the Grand Baron's sect by stepping on the magic array. Is there really a heaven and earth obsidian flame? Are you trying to shirk your responsibility by making up a lie? Executive Feng pulled Bei Gongming into a room and asked coldly. Bei Gongming's heart trembled as he swore, "If this disciple has lied to you, then both my body and soul will be destroyed." Executive Feng's eyes lit up when he heard Bei Gongming's oath. A heaven and earth obsidian flame. This barren southern region actually had a heaven and earth obsidian flame. This was an opportunity. A great opportunity. If he could obtain a heaven and earth obsidian flame, it would be a great merit, and he would be able to obtain many good items in the sect. A heaven and earth obsidian flame is indeed a good item. It's a pity that I have an important matter to deal with. Executive Feng clasped his hands behind his back and furrowed his brows. What is it? Is it more important than a heaven and earth obsidian flame? Bei Gongming was curious. Executive Feng glanced at him and snorted. Didn't you say that the heaven and earth obsidian flame has already been devoured and refined by someone? The monk can run, but the temple can't. You are now in charge of keeping a close eye on the person who devoured the heaven and earth obsidian flame, and keep in touch with me at all times. Once I'm done with the illusory spirit swamp's crystal mine, I'll rush over. Bei Gongming was stunned for a moment, then he sucked in a breath of cold air. A crystal mine. That was an incredible item. The light-wind imperial city regained its peace and tranquility, although the ground was covered in rubble and many people's homes were destroyed. However, because Ji Qingxue had arranged for the guards of the imperial city to disperse the crowd in advance, this disaster didn't cause too many casualties. As for the people whose houses were destroyed, Ji Qingxue arranged for them to stay in the plaza in front of the imperial palace. The gate of heavenly mystery was also opened, accommodating many people. Every family occupied a small area, and they were given some bedding and clothes. Although the commoners were dissatisfied with this, they knew that this was the best solution. At the same time, the restoration of the imperial capital was in full swing. The reconstruction of the houses, the repaving of the streets, and so on were all underway. The clanging sounds of construction echoed unceasingly. The warm morning sun rose above the horizon, casting a warm glow on people's hearts. Bufang got up from his bed with a dazed look on his face. Letting out a yawn, he washed his face and rinsed his mouth before slowly heading downstairs. The kitchen was very quiet. Ever since Yu Fu returned to the illusory spirit swamp, the kitchen was missing an energetic figure. As for Xiao Xiaolong, he wasn't as energetic. Bufang used a fine velvet rope to tie up the ends of his hair, rolled up his sleeves, and walked into the kitchen while twisting his neck. Bufang arrived in front of his own stove and picked up the extremely heavy kitchen knife. He yawned and began to methodically practice his cutting and carving technique. Although his cooking skills had improved a lot compared to when he first arrived, this kind of daily training couldn't be skipped. This was because it trained a chef's foundation. Only when one's foundation was firmly grasped could a tall building rise from the ground. After putting away the kitchen knife, Bufang took out a few pieces of tenderloin meat from the system's dimensional storage and prepared to cook sweet and sour ribs for Blackie. Looking at the tenderloin meat, Bufang suddenly froze. Ah, I almost forgot. That fat dog is going to eat the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs today. Bufang smacked his lips and conveniently put away the tenderloin meat. He walked in front of the cupboard and took out the supreme dragon tenderloin meat that was placed inside yesterday. Green smoke curled up, and the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared. After chopping off a few pieces of dragon tenderloin meat and cleaning it, Bufang took out the black turtle constellation wok. The pitch-black and heavy black turtle constellation wok emitted a simple and unadorned aura. It continuously rotated above his palm, and finally became the size of a normal wok. With a loud bang, it was placed on the stove. Rubbing his nose, Bufang took a step back, and his face became slightly flushed. Then, he opened his mouth and spat out a ball of golden flames. The flames darted into the bottom of the black turtle constellation wok, and began to burn quietly. This method of lighting the fire made Bufang feel a little embarrassed, as if he was the incarnation of the Calabash brothers. What followed was an orderly cooking process. Bufang could recite the cooking process of sweet and sour ribs with his eyes closed, and the cooking process was even more skillful. Moreover, it was not the first time he used dragon meat to make sweet and sour ribs, so he was very experienced. After the supreme fire dragon meat was dipped in oil, its fragrance was incomparably mellow. It slowly floated up, and it constantly tickled one's taste buds. Even Bufang couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Smelling this fragrance, Bufang couldn't help but think of the Buddha jumps over the wall dragon claw that he ate the day before. Delicious, Bufang muttered. Sizzle! The flames in the wok surged, then disappeared. Bufang shook his ladle, scooped up the tangerine red juice from the wok, and poured it onto the dragon meat that had already been processed. Puff! Steam rose up and white steam rolled out. It was accompanied by an explosive fragrance, which intoxicated one and made one unable to extricate themselves. Supreme dragon meat sweet and sour ribs. If others knew about this dish, they would surely be scared out of their wits. Who would dare to eat it? Picking up the fragrant sweet and sour ribs, Bufang furrowed his brows, as if he had thought of something. He put down the sweet and sour ribs and didn't rush to bring it over to Blackie. Blackie, who was standing at the entrance, had already opened its eyes wide while Bufang was cooking sweet and sour ribs. It peeked through the crack of the door, and its nose twitched as it sniffed the fragrance in the air. The Lord Go couldn't wait any longer. Bufang took out the purple spirit fruit tree from the system's dimensional storage, which he had dug up from the 100,000 mountains. He planted it in a corner of the store, and it resonated with the 5 stripes path understanding tree. After planting the purple spirit fruit tree, Bufang noticed that the space within the store had expanded by a lot, and it seemed to have become much more spacious. The tables and chairs within the store were also unknowingly replenished. Did the system unknowingly expand the store? Bufang thought excitedly in his heart. However, Bufang was only excited for a moment. He poured water for the purple spirit fruit tree and took out a bowl of refreshing fruit juice. Refreshing fruit juice, fragrant sweet and sour ribs. Even Bufang was drooling just by looking at it. After opening the store's door, Blackie's dog ears twitched. It took several steps back and excitedly stared at Bufang. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up as he placed the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs and the purple spirit fruit juice in front of Blackie. Today, I will add a drink for you. The taste is pretty good, Bufang lightly said as he rubbed Blacka's spotless fur. Oh! Blacka looked at Bufang in astonishment. This kid knows how to show filial respect to the Lord Go? With a satisfied snort, the Lord Go impatiently gobbled up the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs that Bufang had placed on the table. It had been looking forward to eating this sweet and sour ribs for a long time. Delicious, woof! After a piece of sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs entered his mouth, the Lord Go felt so happy that he almost shed tears. He was completely intoxicated by the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs and was unable to extricate himself. His dog's tail was wagging rapidly. The Lord Go loved the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs, and the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs loved the Lord Go. This was the Lord Go's happy day. Bufang rubbed Blacka's head once more. He stood up and walked back into the store. He pulled a chair and comfortably curled up on it. As the warm sunlight shone down from the sky, his eyes once again became empty and spacious. Bufang really enjoyed this kind of leisurely life. He yawned and almost fell asleep. However, just as he closed his eyes, the system's voice resounded in his mind. The sudden voice almost scared the relaxed Bufang to death. Chapter 377. Temporary Mission. Host, please proceed to the illusory spirit swamp and fight for the Big Crystal Mine's crystal source. Host, open the treasure contained within the crystal source and use the treasure to cook a dish. Mission reward: 20% of your true energy cultivation. The solemn and earnest voice of the system resounded in the drowsy Bufang's mind. It was like an alarm clock ringing in his ears while he was half asleep, and it almost scared him to the point that he fell off the chair he was curled up in. Bufang opened his eyes. There was a hint of confusion in his eyes. He patted his chest with a dark expression on his face. System, can you give me a warning when you issue a mission next time? Don't suddenly give me a warning. You'll scare me to death. Bufang calmed himself down and said with dissatisfaction. The temporary mission will start in 3 days. Host, please prepare in advance. This mission requires Little Black to follow the host. Host, please conquer Little Black within 3 days. If Little Black is unwilling to go, it will be judged that the host has failed the temporary mission, and 10% of the true chi cultivation reward will be deducted. The host was still as solemn as ever. However, the content of the system's words made Bufang raise his brows. He was extremely astonished and puzzled. This time, Blackie was actually going to accompany him? Wasn't it supposed to be Xiao Bai? Why did it become Blackie, that lazy dog? Bufang blinked his eyes and turned his head to look at Blackie, who was eating the fragrant sweet and sour ribs on a porcelain plate. Bufang couldn't help but grin. Does the system want me to convince Blackie to accompany me to complete this temporary mission? Bufang muttered. That's right, host. The system's words suddenly jumped out. Bufang, who was deep in thought, was startled once again. Are you sure you're not joking with me? Trying to convince this lazy dog to accompany me? Xiaobai is so good. He's obedient and cute. His chubby belly feels so good to the touch. This fat dog. Sigh, let's not talk about it. Bufang felt a little tired. However, at the same time, he was also a little surprised because the reward for this temporary mission was really tempting. The reward of 20% of true chi cultivation could save a lot of business time for Bufang. Bufang felt that he needed to work hard for the reward of 20% true chi cultivation. Wasn't it just to lure a fat dog? He was so handsome, he could definitely do it. Just as Bufang was deep in thought, a few figures quickly walked in from outside the store, interrupting Bufang's thoughts. Bufang looked up. It was none other than Anai Yen and the white-bearded old man. Behind Anai Yen were the Xiao siblings. The dejected look on Xiao Xiaolong's face had already disappeared. His complexion was rosy and glossy. His skin was fair and delicate, and he was full of vigor. Owner Bu, good morning. Xiao Xiaolong happily greeted Bufang. However, Bufang did not reply to him. He only looked at him indifferently until Xiao Xiaolong's face was as red as a monkey's butt. He rushed into the kitchen and started practicing. If you come so late again, you know the consequences. Bufang stood up from the chair and said to Xiao Xiaolong, who had already entered the kitchen. Xiao Xiaolong suddenly staggered. His heart was filled with grief and indignation. Sister Yu Fu is not here, you only know how to bully me. Xiao Yanyu gently looked at Bufang. She raised her slender hand and took out a huge pouch. The pouch was filled with crystals and she handed it to Bufang. Owner Bu, this is 10,000 crystals. However, no amount of crystals is enough to express the gratitude of our Xiao family to Owner Bu. Xiao Yanyu said with a hint of gratitude and sincerity as she stared at Bufang with her watery eyes. Her words made Bufang a little embarrassed. However, Bufang did not know whether it was because he was thick-skinned or something else, but his expression did not change in the slightest. He simply received the pouch as if it was a matter of course and put it away. Ouyang Xiaoyi cheerfully walked into the store while humming a little tune. After staying in the store for so long, she quickly noticed that the store was different. After walking around the Path Understanding tree and the newly planted purple spirit fruit tree, she realized that the store seemed to have become much more spacious. Smelly boss. The store seems to have become bigger. Ouyang Xiaoyi stared at Bufang and asked. It has expanded. Bufang calmly replied without explaining anything. He was currently worrying about how to convince Blackie to go with him on a mission. The crystal mine in the illusory spirit swamp? When Bufang thought of the location of the temporary mission, he could not help but feel surprised. It was the illusory spirit swamp again. Moreover, what was a crystal mine? Was it any different from the crystal mine in Fatty Jin's house? Host, please note that crystal mines are ordinary veins that are buried deep underground to produce crystals. They do not contain any crystal sources, so the crystals produced are of poor quality and contain a lot of impurities. Big origin crystal mines are also large origin crystal mines that are buried deep in the ground and nurture countless origin crystals. Big origin crystal mines contain crystal sources, and the origin crystals produced are of high quality and have few impurities. They are the currency of the hidden dragon continent and are essential for cultivation. The system explained to Bufang. Bufang suddenly understood. In short, a crystal mine was a crystal mine. However, it was much more abundant than a crystal mine. Moreover, it contained crystal sources and the target of Bufang's temporary mission was the crystal sources. Normally, a large crystal mine will produce 3 crystal sources. One of them is a solid crystal source, so its value is quite low. The other 2 are non-solid crystal sources, so their value is quite high. There is a mysterious object hidden within the crystal sources. This mysterious object could be a precious medicine from the ancient times, or it could be some mysterious creature. The system would explain new terms to Bufang in a timely manner. This was because this would determine whether Bufang would be able to complete the temporary mission. After listening to the system's description, Bufang suddenly felt that the crystal sources were quite interesting. System, do you think there might be an ancient divine dragon hidden within the crystal sources? Bufang guessed. Host, please do not worry. It is impossible for the crystal sources of a crystal mine to contain an ancient divine beast. This is because the energy provided by a crystal mine is not enough to make a divine beast hibernate. Bufang curiously asked the system about the temporary mission. Yen and the others had already ordered their dishes. After Ouyang Xiaoyi told Bufang the names of the dishes, Bufang directly entered the kitchen and started cooking. The Supreme Elder sat on a chair and looked at Bufang's back as he entered the kitchen with a profound look in his eyes. The injuries on his body had already recovered after he consumed the Buddha jumps over the wall soup the day before. The effects of that dish were even more powerful than elixirs. This was the first time the Supreme Elder sized up the store so seriously and solemnly. The more he looked at it, the more apprehensive he became. Regardless of whether it was the mysterious Bufong, the plump dog that was crouching at the entrance and gobbling down its food, or the iron puppet that was meticulously standing in the kitchen, all of them emitted a mysterious aura. He took out several jade talismans and started to make deductions. It seemed like he was trying to deduce some clues about Bufong. He guessed that it was impossible for a terrifying existence like the black dog to become a watchdog in a land of mortals. Bufong definitely had an extraordinary identity. Could it be that he was the son of some expert from the hidden dragon continent? Or could it be that some almighty expert had concealed his divine ability and was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? The more he thought about it, the more curious he became. However, before he could start to deduce anything, the Supreme Elder's mind trembled. His whole body seemed to be suffocated, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. An oppressive aura was emitted from the store, causing the jade talismans in his hand to shatter. The Supreme Elder's whole body was in a trance and his complexion became pale. His heart suddenly shivered and he calmed his mind. He didn't dare to make any other movements. Without a doubt, this store was too king scary. He wanted to find some clues from the heavens and was almost devoured. Fortunately, he was mentally prepared and gave up quickly. Yen looked at the Supreme Elder with a puzzled expression. Looking at the shattered divination talismans on the table, this outrageously beautiful woman curled her lips. She didn't care about Bufong's identity. She only cared about whether Ownerbu's dishes were delicious or not. What did Ownerbu's identity have to do with her? Fragrant dishes were carried out from the kitchen and placed on the table. Yan's eyes immediately lit up and she couldn't wait to start eating heartily. The Supreme Elder looked at Bufong with reverence in his eyes, which made Bufong feel a little puzzled. Why did this old man's eyes suddenly become so strange? Could it be that he had become more handsome? However, he was too lazy to pay attention to this old man. After he finished cooking all the dishes, he leisurely walked to the door. Under the puzzled gazes of the people in the store, Bufong pulled up his pants and squatted down. He looked at the black dog that was eating non-stop from the porcelain bowl and smiled foolishly. Chapter 378. Illusory Spirit Swamp, Grand Serpentmen City. The majestic Grand Serpentmen City was situated in the middle of the illusory Spirit Swamp. The city was extremely majestic, and its towering city walls almost covered the entire sky. On top of the city walls, serpent men guards wielding swords and sabers stood guard. These serpent men were full of vigor, and a sharp glint could be seen in their eyes. The Grand Serpentmen City was built by the Serpentine Sovereign, and it was the home of all serpent men. Every serpent man had a strong sense of belonging to the city, and they couldn't help but feel proud of themselves when they stayed in the city. Many serpent men tribes in the illusory Spirit Swamp would come to the Grand Serpentmen City as if they were paying their respects. The illusory Spirit Swamp was situated above the Light Wind Empire, but its west side was connected to the vast ocean, and its surface area was extremely vast. The ocean was a mysterious place to everyone. At this moment, at the border of the ocean, on top of a precipitous cliff, an enchanting figure was proudly standing there. This was a Naga. She had a beautiful face and a head full of green hair that fluttered in the sea breeze. Her lower body was that of a green serpent, and her upper body was that of a human. This was the Serpentine Sovereign of the Grand Serpentmen City. The Serpentine Sovereign's tail coiled as she stood on the precipitous cliff. Her beautiful eyes gazed at the surging waves that were crashing down from the cliff. The waves surged up to the sky and blew away the water vapor. The water vapor was somewhat salty, and this was the smell of the ocean. Although the vast ocean was full of unknowns, it was extremely tempting to experts, because the opportunities in the ocean were no less than those on the continent. The Serpentine Sovereign had already reached the bottleneck of the Supreme Being realm. She originally wanted to snatch the 10,000 bestial flames to evolve and break through to a higher level, but in the end, she failed. She didn't manage to snatch the 10,000 bestial flames. Without the 10,000 bestial flames, it would be extremely difficult for her to break through the shackles of the Supreme Being realm. Therefore, she only had one thought in her mind, and it could even be said that she had already made up her mind. After dealing with the matters in the Grand Serpentman City, she would head to the boundless ocean in search of the opportunity to break through the shackles of the Supreme Being realm and step into the 10th grade divine realm. In a swamp several hundred miles away from the Grand Serpentine City, many young and strong serpent men were hard at work. A huge pit was dug out of the swamp, and the slowly flowing mud exuded a fishy stench. At the bottom of the hole, boundless spiritual energy soared into the sky. The faces of the serpent men were filled with excitement. They kept coming out of the pit and bringing out crystals that were stained with black swamp mud. The crystal shone resplendently, and its quality was very good. Baijan stood upright with his hands behind his back. Even though he was standing on the swamp, he did not stain it at all. He looked at the pit in the swamp with excitement in his eyes. At the bottom of this pit was a crystal mine with a sizable amount of reserve. This crystal mine had been discovered not too long ago. The Grand Serpentine City and the White Cloud Villa had fought over it, but in the end, they decided to jointly develop this crystal mine. As the excavation continued, Baijan became increasingly alarmed. He discovered that the size of this crystal mine had exceeded his expectations. It was so big that it was hard to imagine. Such a huge origin crystal mine could definitely increase the strength of the White Cloud Villa by a large margin. Smelly boss, what is he doing? She looked at Bufang, who was squatting in front of Blackie and had a silly smile on his face. She was puzzled. Bufang's silly smile was really unsightly. Blackie, who was slurping his bowl of sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs, noticed Bufang, who was squatting in front of him, and had a silly smile on his face. The Lord Go's eyes widened when he saw Bufang's smile, and all the fur on his body stood on end. What was Bufang trying to do? The Lord Go raised his head. His mouth was still stained with the orange juice of the sweet and sour ribs. With a wave of his paw, he picked up the porcelain plate in front of him and stared at Bufang vigilantly. No one should think about snatching the sweet and sour ribs from the Lord Go. The sweet and sour ribs were with the dog. If anyone wanted to snatch the sweet and sour ribs, they would have to ask the permission of the Lord Go's paw. The Lord Go bared his teeth at Bufang, revealing his pure white canine teeth. Between his teeth, there were still a few strands of tender meat, and his dog tail wagged. The smile on Bufang's face froze. His sincere and gentle smile couldn't move the Lord Go? Bufang rubbed his stiff face, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. Could it be that the way he smiled just now was wrong? Glancing at the Lord Go, Bufang let out a breath. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he revealed a smile that made the hair on the dog's body stand on end. What the hell was he smiling for? The Lord Go really wanted to slap Bufang away. Why did he come over and smile for no reason? Why did he have to smile in such a frightening manner? The Lord Go snorted, and he couldn't be bothered with Bufang. With a shake of his tail, he turned his body around, and his butt faced Bufang. Then, he continued to bury his head in the porcelain bowl of fragrant sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs. Bufang's face became expressionless, and he felt a little defeated in his heart. Was his smile not infectious enough? Was his smile not warm enough? After thinking for a while, Bufang gave up on the idea of using his smile to move Blackie. How could a dog understand his charming smile? Grabbing Blackie's tail, which was constantly wagging, Bufang slightly tugged it. Blackie instantly turned its head in anger, and it glared at Bufang as it continued to bare its teeth. Turn around and eat. Let's discuss something, Bufang said calmly. Blackie was taken aback. With a snort, it turned around to face Bufang, and continued to bury its head in the porcelain bowl. Blackie, look at you. You've been lying in front of the store every day and you've become fat. How could a body like this attract female dogs? The next time I go out to do a mission, you should come with me. At the same time, you can exercise your body and make it slimmer to attract female dogs. Bufang said in all seriousness. Attract female dogs? The Lord Go was so coquettish, and he was emitting an astonishing charm from the inside out. Did he still need to use that vulgar appearance to decorate himself? Blackie rolled its eyes at Bufang's words, too lazy to pay him any attention. Bufang felt bitter. It was all his fault for spoiling this fat dog. Blackie, you can't give up on yourself. For a better tomorrow, you need to stand up and change yourself. Only then will you be happy in the future. Bufang tried to persuade it. Go out with the boss, see the world, and lose weight. Blackie didn't intend to pay attention to Bufang, who didn't know what was wrong with his brain. It immersed itself in eating the sweet and sour ribs. The sweet and sour ribs made with the supreme dragon meat was simply too delicious. The more it ate, the more fragrant it became. The fruit juice was also very delicious. Eating sweet and sour ribs while drinking fruit juice was simply the most perfect dog life. Bufang felt that he was being ignored again. He realized that he couldn't even compare to a sweet and sour ribs. It seemed that he could only use his trump card. Bufang's face was serious. He squatted down and looked at Blackie seriously. Don't you like sweet and sour ribs? Very well. Blackie, do you want to go out with me? If you don't, then don't ever think about eating sweet and sour ribs again. If you can eat sweet and sour ribs, consider it my loss. Little guy. If I don't cook sweet and sour ribs for you, am I not afraid that you will obediently give in? Bufang calmly thought to himself. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up, revealing a creepy smile. Blackie's movements suddenly froze. Then, it raised its dog head, and its dog eyes just happened to see the hair-raising smile on Bufang's face. Then, it stuck out its dog tongue, snorted, and continued to eat sweet and sour ribs. It was as if a gust of cold wind blew past, blowing up Bufang's hair, making him feel somewhat miserable. Why wasn't Blackie worried about his threat at all? Could it be that even if he didn't cook sweet and sour ribs as a punishment, he still wouldn't be able to subdue Blackie? Blackie indeed didn't care about Bufang's threat. Wasn't it just not giving him sweet and sour ribs? In the days without sweet and sour ribs, the Lord Go would be fine after a good sleep. If he slept for a few hundred years, why would he eat sweet and sour ribs? Using sweet and sour ribs to threaten the Lord Go. How naive. Feeling stifled, Bufang straightened his body and shook his somewhat stiff legs. This lazy dog, why was it so difficult for him to go out for a stroll? All he knew was to eat and sleep, sleep and eat. How could he find a beautiful female dog like this? Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and strolled in front of the store. From afar, Ji Qingxue was striding over. Beside him were a few little eunuchs who were jogging over. They were rushing toward the store. Meanwhile, Bufang's pacing figure suddenly stopped, as if he had thought of something. He turned his head to look at Blackie and calmly said, "How about this? You come with me for a stroll on a mission, and in the future, I'll double the amount of sweet and sour ribs. Double the amount. Double the amount. Double the amount. Double the amount." Blackie's ears twitched, and it abruptly pulled its head out from the porcelain plate. Its dog eyes emitted a bright light as it stared straight at Bufang, giving Bufang a fright. Bufang raised his eyebrows and stared straight at Blackie. Blackie stuck out its tongue and licked its lip. Then, it slowly raised its dainty and exquisite dog paw. Ji Qingxue, who was excitedly walking over from afar, was instantly startled. Both of his legs turned to jelly. What's wrong with the Lord Go? Did I offend him in some way? Why is he raising his dog paw? If there's anything, we can talk it out. Don't raise your paw, it's too dangerous. The Lord Go's eyes were bursting with excitement. 2 fingers on its dainty dog paw popped out with a snap. Double the amount, and double the amount of sweet and sour ribs. Otherwise, there's no deal. The gentle and magnetic voice of the Lord Go resounded. Bufang was silent for a moment. With an expressionless face, he said, "Deal." At this moment, Bufang was somewhat speechless. This dog already had no moral integrity. It turned out that conquering it was so simple. It was just a matter of adding a few more pieces of sweet and sour ribs. Chapter 379. In the distance, Ji Qingxue, who was observing from afar, saw Bufang turn around and enter the store with a face full of satisfaction. Then, he walked over while trembling. He was really frightened by Blackie. Waving its paw for no reason. Was that paw something that could be waved so casually? Even a supreme being could be swatted to death by a paw. How could he not tremble in fear? When Blackie once again started gobbling up the sweet and sour ribs on the porcelain plate, Ji Qingxue carefully walked into the store with the few young eunuchs. He came here today because he had something to discuss with owner Bu. Once he entered the store, Ji Qingxue couldn't help but take a deep breath. The fragrance that filled the air made him reveal a face full of enjoyment. He didn't immediately look for Bufang to discuss something. Instead, he found a seat and began to order dishes. He also ordered a portion of Ice Heart Jade Urn wine. After he ate and drank to his heart's content, he let out a breath of satisfaction. "Owner Bu, I have something to discuss with you." Sitting on a chair, Ji Qingxue looked at Bufang, who was curled up on a chair, and said. Bufang, who was originally squinting his eyes, suddenly felt a little puzzled and turned his head to look at Ji Qingxue. "You should know about the battle between supreme beings this time. It was extremely terrifying. More than half of the imperial city was destroyed in the battle. Many citizens were homeless and their moods were a little low." Ji Qingxue sighed and slowly said. Bufang became silent and didn't say anything. His gaze only continued to look at Ji Qingxue. "I would like to earnestly request owner Bu to cook some dishes for the citizens and use delicacies to alleviate their moods." Ji Qingxue sincerely looked at Bufang. This was also a method that he came up with after thinking for a long time. Owner Bu's dishes were dishes that could make people happy. It should be very effective in alleviating the citizens' sorrowful mood. However, he wasn't sure if Bufang would cook for him. He also didn't know how much it would cost to ask Bufang to cook for him. After all, if he wanted to cook a dish that could satisfy more than half of the people in the imperial capital, the amount of ingredients needed could not be underestimated. Bufang looked at Ji Qingxue in astonishment. He didn't expect Ji Qingxue to ask him to cook for him. Bufang did not refuse, because a large part of the reason for the battle between the Supremes was caused by him, and the destruction of half of the imperial capital was also related to him, so it was naturally not a problem for him to cook. However, he had already convinced Little Black, and 3 days later, he would start the mission and leave the imperial capital. Therefore, this event had to be brought forward as soon as possible. He told Ji Qingxue about this request, and Ji Qingxue's face immediately lit up with excitement. As long as Bufang was willing to help, it would be fine. As for the timing, it was not a problem. Ji Qingxue returned excitedly. He patted his chest and took on the task of preparing the ingredient. It was already not easy to get Bufang to help him. With the Light Wind Empire's treasury, preparing ingredients was still a piece of cake. The event was scheduled for the next day. Once Ji Qingxue returned to the imperial palace, he ordered people to spread the news. The news that the Black-Hearted Store's owner was going to cook for the citizens of the imperial capital quickly spread throughout the imperial capital. Everyone was filled with excitement and anticipation. Nowadays, the Black-Hearted Store's reputation in the imperial capital was like a thunderclap piercing the ears. From 70 to 80-year-old old men to 3-year-old Spanish children, everyone had heard of the Black-Hearted Store. How could people not be excited when the owner of such a famous store was going to cook for them? Some people were so excited that they couldn't sleep. The next morning, Bufang got out of bed early in the morning and went to the kitchen to practice his cutting and carving skills. After cooking an extra portion of sweet and sour ribs for Blackie, who was lying at the entrance, he opened the store. Xiao Xiaolong and Ouyang Xiaoyi both arrived at the store. Bufang let Xiao Xiaolong continue the business of the store, and brought Ouyang Xiaoyi toward the main hall of the imperial palace of the Light Wind Empire. Since he had already promised Ji Qingxue, he naturally would not go back on his word. Yesterday, he had already informed Ji Qingxue about the ingredients he needed and asked him to prepare them in advance. Now, he was heading over to prepare the ingredients. Light Wind Empire's imperial capital, Gate of Heavenly Mystery Plaza. The vast Gate of Heavenly Mystery Plaza was packed with citizens of the imperial capital. This place had practically turned into a small bazaar. Since the houses of the citizens were destroyed, these citizens were all gathered here. Some of them set up tents, while others took advantage of the chaos to set up stalls. Business was booming. Bufang was dumbfounded at the sight of this bustling scene. He felt as if he had returned to the market in his previous life. Bufang squeezed through the Gate of Heavenly Mystery Plaza with Ouyang Xiaoyi and directly entered the imperial palace. Ji Qingxue, who was in the main hall, was already waiting for Bufang. When he saw Bufang arrive, he personally led Bufang to the imperial kitchen. The imperial kitchen was very neat and tidy. A row of chefs was excitedly staring at Bufang. In the Light Wind Empire, Bufang was the idol of all chefs. After the ingredients filled the entire room, Bufang lightly nodded his head and picked up a kitchen knife. He began to skillfully prepare the ingredient. The speed at which Bufang swung the kitchen knife was extremely fast. An average person would not be able to follow it with their naked eyes. The sound of the kitchen knife colliding with the chopping board seemed to have a very harmonious rhythm. The moment the knife gleamed, it was like a shooting star streaking across the sky, instantly stunning the onlookers. In just a short while, the large pile of ingredients was completely prepared. As for Bufang, he also began to prepare his dish. The dish had to be large and suitable for a large number of people. Without a doubt, it was the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. This was the dish that he won the previous 100 family banquet. Using it to cook would not be a disgrace to his reputation. When bowls of white and tender dumplings came out of the pot and were placed in piping hot bowls, they were served to the people who had been waiting for a long time on the gate of Tianxian Square. Excited shouts immediately rang out from the gate of Tianxian Square. When the first person bit into the wrapper of the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumpling, the aroma of the meat surged out. Numerous fragrances converged together and a multicolored radiance burst forth from the dumplings. It was as if clouds of various colors were forming in the sky. It was extremely beautiful. Every person who ate the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings had an intoxicated expression on their face. The joyful emotions contained within the crescent moon dumplings made these people, who were originally sad due to being displaced, feel much better. They were filled with hope for the future. In the majestic palace within the 100,000 mountains, Deacon Feng slowly led a group of disciples out of the hall and stopped on the square. Executive Feng's gaze swept across the crowd. There was not the slightest trace of a smile on his meticulous face. Instead, there was a hint of coldness on his face. Normally, none of you have ever ventured into the training grounds. This time, I will bring you all into the training grounds and face the natives of the training grounds. You all need to train and fight. These natives with low cultivation levels are just right for you all. This is a test for you all. I hope that you all will not disappoint me and the sect. Executive Feng solemnly said. After he finished speaking, 2 figures walked out from behind him. They were 2 figures wrapped in gray robes. Executive Feng nodded his head at the 2 of them, and a powerful aura burst forth from their bodies. They formed hand seals, and a formless wave of energy was immediately released from the surroundings of the palace. Rays of light flowed into the bodies of the disciples who were about to set out. After doing all this, Executive Feng nodded his head in satisfaction. He waved his hand and a huge warship appeared out of thin air. It grew larger and larger until it covered the entire sky. The huge spirit warship floated in the air and emitted a majestic aura. The faces of the disciples were filled with fanaticism. When all the disciples had boarded the warship, Executive Feng also floated up and stepped on the void as he entered the warship. A rumble resounded. It was like the sound of a morning bell. The warship began to move slowly in the air. It emitted a violent whistling sound as it sped forward. It rushed out of the 100,000 mountains and sped toward the illusory spirit swamp. The crystal mine cannot be lost. It must be controlled by the Grand Baron's sect. Any natives who dare to obstruct us will be killed without mercy. Executive Feng stood proudly at the forefront of the battlefield. He didn't care about the howling of the wind and the fluttering of his clothes. He remained unmoved. The battlefield slowly flew out of the 100,000 mountains and flew above the Clear Sky Pagoda. The experts in the Clear Sky Pagoda didn't dare to breathe loudly. All the experts in the Clear Sky Pagoda were terrified. Executive Feng, who stood at the forefront of the warship, shot a disdainful glance at the Clear Sky Pagoda. After the warship left, Bei Gongming was filled with grief and indignation. His goal was to go to the Light Wind Imperial City and watch over the kid who had devoured the heaven and earth obsidian flames. He would wait for Executive Feng to return and take back the 10,000 bestial flames. Bei Gongming was extremely unwilling and resentful. He couldn't wait to see the miserable fate of the kid who had smashed him with the wok 3 times. Executive Feng was in existence in the divine physique echelon. Wouldn't dealing with a kid who was only at the 7th grade be as easy as kneading mud? Even if that puppet could rival a peak supreme being, in front of a divine physique echelon expert, it was just an ant. Tremble. Damned natives. I have already prepared the black wok and am ready to smash it back. Chapter 380. After opening the store's doors, sunlight shone down from the heavens and shone onto Bu Fang's body. It gave off a warm and comfortable feeling. Blackie was lying on the ground, resting with its eyes closed. It didn't pay any attention to Bu Fang, who had just walked out of the store. After yawning and stretching, Bu Fang, who was wearing a white robe, walked to Blackie's side and rubbed its head. Blackie woke up from its slumber and glared at Bu Fang angrily. "Don't disturb Lord Go when there's no sweet and sour ribs. Don't sleep anymore. Get ready to set off. We're about to start our mission." The corners of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. He didn't care about Lord Go's angry gaze and continued to rub its head. Blackie was taken aback. Start a mission? Bu Fang had already entrusted most of the store's matters to Xiao Xiaolong. However, he wasn't too worried because Xiao Xiaolong was already familiar with the business. After all, Bu Fang was always out of the store. Bu Fang stood up and slightly raised its head. He saw a white speck of light slowly emerging above his head. Then, it increased in number and began to draw out a mysterious teleportation array. Host, please pay attention. The teleportation of the illusory spirit swamp is about to begin. The system's solemn and earnest voice suddenly resounded in Bu Fang's mind, causing Bu Fang's mind to shiver. Lord Go raised its eyes and glanced at the teleportation array above Bu Fang's head. A trace of astonishment flashed through its eyes. Super long-distance teleportation array? It's such a waste to use this kind of teleportation array on such a small scale. Lord Go muttered in its heart. Then, it saw waves of wind coming from the teleportation array. Whoosh! Soon, a strong hurricane surged out from the teleportation array and wrapped around Bu Fang's body. Was the teleportation about to begin? Bu Fang was summoning Blackie. Blackie calmly stood up from the ground. With graceful cat-like steps, It gradually stepped into the hurricane. Buzz, a wave of fluctuation resounded. Then, Bufong and Blacka disappeared without a trace. The front of the store regained its tranquility. Illusory Spirit Swamp. A white speck of light suddenly appeared in the sky above a swamp. In an instant, the number of white specks of light increased. Very quickly, they covered the sky and formed a formation. A gust of wind rose, sweeping up the mud and water in the swamp, and the sound of water splashing resounded without end. The little spirit beast in the swamp was even swept up into the sky by the strong wind with a blank look on its face. The gale suddenly dissipated, revealing a figure. Without the support of the gust of wind, the swamp that covered the sky fell down with a thud. Blacka stood beside Bufong and looked at its surroundings with disgust. The ground was filled with sticky swamp mud, and the stench made Blackie want to close its nose. What kind of a messy place was this? Bufong looked around and suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. Although the environment in the illusory spirit swamp was not much different, there were still some places that were unique. Not far ahead is the location of the Serpent Men's herb garden. Yu Fu's Serpent Men tribe is there. Bufong thought to himself and slightly squinted his eyes. He thought about Yu Fu. After returning to the Serpent Men tribe, there seemed to be no news of her. Could it be that she was addicted to the Serpent Men tribe and didn't want to return to the store? Since he was here today, he decided to go to the Serpent Men tribe and take a look. He wanted to see what happened to Yu Fu. Logically speaking, she should have returned to the store a long time ago. With this thought in mind, Bufong led Blackie, whose face was filled with disgust and unwillingness, toward the Serpent Men tribe. Indeed, after a short while, he saw the simple fence of the Serpent Men's herb garden. Since he saw the Serpent Men's herb garden, the Serpent Men tribe shouldn't be far away. As Bufong stepped over the fence, Blackie waved its paw and directly smashed the fence into pieces. Then, it raised its head and continued forward with graceful cat-like steps. Bufong rolled his eyes. What a tsundere dog! The spirit herbs in the Serpent Men's herb garden were still flourishing. However, the current Bufong naturally didn't care for these low-grade spirit herbs, so he didn't pay much attention to them. As for Blackie, it was even more so. A man and a dog quickly crossed the herb garden. At this time, they were finally noticed by the Serpent Men guarding the herb garden. Who is it? With a loud roar, several Serpent Men with spears in their hands swayed their bodies and surrounded Bufong. Bufong calmly glanced at the Serpent Men guards surrounding him and frowned. Stop fooling around. Go and find your chief, Yu Feng. Bufong's words caused the surrounding Serpent Men to be taken aback. Was there a hole in the brain of this human who brought a dog with him? Just because he called for their chief, the chief would come over? Was he here to make a joke? A disdainful sneer appeared on the faces of the guards. This human was really arrogant. Was the chief someone he could meet whenever he wanted? Be obedient and come with us. The chief isn't someone that any random cat, dog can meet. The Serpent Man guard sneered. He glanced at Blackie, who was beside Bufong, and waved his spear. The spear, which was emitting a chilling aura, was immediately pointed at Bufong. Blacka looked at the group of guards waving their spears and immediately rolled its eyes. It was ready to raise its paw. This group of ant-like serpent men could be disposed of with a wave of its paw. Why is this brat Bufong wasting time with them? The sooner he finishes his mission, the sooner he can go back to sleep. Seeing that Blackie was about to make a move, Bufong immediately coughed to stop it. He looked toward the serpent men guards and the aura of a 7th-grade battle saint burst out from his body. Don't wave your paw at the slightest provocation. I have to convince people with reason, Bufong thought. The guards were not stupid. When they sensed the aura of a 7th-grade battle saint on Bufong's body, their expressions changed drastically. The human in front of them was actually a 7th-grade battle saint. Fear suddenly emerged in the hearts of the guards. Facing a 7th-grade battle saint, The strongest among them was only a 5th-grade battle king. How could they be a match? Take me to your chief, Bufong calmly said. The serpent men guards did not dare to refuse. They could only lead Bufong toward the serpent men tribe. They did not know Bufong, so they did not know that Bufong had come to the serpent men tribe before. In the distance, it seemed that the serpent men had received news that a human had invaded the serpent men tribe. The elite serpent men guards rushed over. There was even a loud roar that resounded. Who dares to trespass my serpent men tribe? With an angry roar, a violent figure dashed over from afar, stirring up the mud on the ground. The serpent man Anai glared at the surroundings. The surrounding serpent men looked at him with respect on their faces. The serpent man Anai was the commander of their guards. His cultivation level had already reached the 7th-grade battle saint realm. He was incomparably powerful. With Commander Anai making a move, this human who dared to trespass the serpent men tribe was finished. The serpent man Anai's aura was extremely powerful. His eyes were wide open like bronze bells. The muscles on his upper body were densely packed, filled with explosive power. As soon as he appeared, his gaze swept over and landed on the guards. You said that a human dared to trespass our serpent men tribe? He even dared to shamelessly say that he wanted to see the chief? Anai said. As he spoke, his gaze passed over the guards and landed on Bufong, who was standing in the middle of the guards and looking at him with a smile that was not a smile. When the serpent men guard saw Anai's arrival, he immediately regained his confidence. He hurriedly told Anai what had happened, adding fuel to the fire. This arrogant human, you will suffer. Since you dared to act tough, you will have to bear the price of acting tough. However, his expression suddenly froze. His voice became weaker and weaker, until it was almost inaudible. His eyes widened, filled with disbelief and fear as he stared into the distance. He saw that the moment the commander, Anai, whom he greatly admired, saw that human, his tyrannical aura disappeared. He quickly ran to the front of the human and bowed respectfully. The serpent men guard was a little dumbfounded. This scene was simply too shocking. Was this still the dignified commander Anai that they usually knew? Was it still the domineering commander Anai who could tear a 6th-rank spirit beast apart and slay a 7th-rank spirit beast with his bare hands? Io Owner Bu? Why are you here? You didn't even inform Anai when you came. When Anai saw Bufong, his heart shuddered. Then, he was extremely surprised and quickly said respectfully. He had no choice but to be respectful. Who was the person in front of him? He was the owner of the Black-Hearted store in the Light Wind Imperial City. That Black-Hearted store was incomparably valiant. A large number of 8th-grade war gods had died there. He did not dare to challenge the human in front of him. Besides, there was no need for him to do so. Bufong had always been his idol. He even wanted to learn cooking from Bufong, but Bufong rejected him mercilessly. But that didn't stop him from admiring Bufong. Bufong looked at Anai, who was full of excitement and respect, and felt as if he had seen a fan. He felt a little elated and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Where's Yu Fu? She should have already returned to the Serpent Men tribe, right? Could it be that she hasn't settled the matters in the tribe? Bufong didn't hesitate. He looked at the Serpent Man Anai and asked directly. His purpose of coming to the Serpent Men tribe was to find out about Yu Fu's matter. That lass was his apprentice chef. He should show some concern for her. However, when Bufong mentioned Yu Fu's name, the faces of the serpent men in the surroundings instantly became unsightly. The excited Ani's face stiffened. He looked at Bufong embarrassedly and his eyes were filled with hesitation. Bufong suddenly felt that something was wrong. He furrowed his brows and asked, "What's going on?" Ani took a deep breath. He seemed to feel that Bufong's expression was becoming colder and colder. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. His eyes glanced at the lazy fat dog beside Bufong. His pupils constricted, and he felt as if his heart was being grasped by an invisible hand. He couldn't even breathe. Why is this dog here? This fat dog was as terrifying as a devil. The scene of Blackie killing a group of 8th grade war gods with a single palm was still deeply imprinted in his mind. It was difficult to erase it. Now that he saw Blackie, he subconsciously felt fear. However, when he met Bufang's ice-cold gaze, his heart trembled. In the end, he still opened his mouth. However, his eyes seemed to be wandering. Yu Fu encountered a small problem. She isn't in the tribe now. However, Owner Bu, Yu Fu might not go back to learn cooking from you in the future. Chapter 381. Yu Fu might not be able to go back to learn cooking from you in the future. Anai said these words with some trepidation. From time to time, he would pay attention to Bufang's expression, for fear that if Bufang became unhappy, the dog beside him would slap him to death with its paw. However, his worries were superfluous. Blackie rolled its eyes and ignored him. A little serpent man was not worthy of the Lord Go's claws. When Bufang heard this, his reaction was not as extreme as Anai had expected. He just slightly furrowed his brows, feeling a little puzzled. What do you mean? What happened to Yu Fu? Bufang asked in confusion. Anai heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. However, he did not dare to look at Bufang's eyes. He clenched his teeth and said, "Let the chief explain it to you personally. I'm not good with words, so I can't speak clearly." Bufang didn't mind, so he nodded. Disperse. Why are all of you so nervous with your spears in your hands? This Senior Bu is a friend of our Serpent Men tribe. When Anai saw Bufang nod, his face immediately lit up. Then, he turned around and looked at the group of Serpent Men guards. His eyes immediately widened. He waved his hand and shouted with a straight face. He really did have the aura of a commander. Bufang found it a little funny, but he just let Anai lead the way. The Serpent Men guards immediately looked at the back of Bufang and Anai in awe. Along the way, Anai excitedly introduced everything about the Serpent Men tribe to Bufang. Bufang was a little surprised. He had not been here for a long time, but the Serpent Men tribe had undergone many changes. Compared to the previous simple and crude appearance, the current Serpent Men tribe could be considered to be much more prosperous. Although it was still a small tribe, the houses and everything else had become brand new. The surrounding Serpent Men's faces seemed to be a little different from before. Anai brought Bufang to the front of a small house. He first let Bufang rest inside for a while, then he wagged his tail and went to find the patriarch. Bufang nodded, clasped his hands behind his back, and waited in this much more exquisite room. He wanted to find the crystal mine in the illusory spirit swamp. Perhaps he could ask the chief of the Serpent Men tribe. After all, he was not very familiar with the illusory spirit swamp. If the chief could lead the way, he might be able to familiarize himself with the place. After a while, Anai brought several figures over from afar. One of them was the spirited Serpent Man Yu Feng, the current chief of the Serpent Men tribe. After all, his cultivation was the highest. Beside him were a few elders of the Serpent Men tribe, but Yu Fu was nowhere to be seen. Bufang slightly raised his eyebrows. He suddenly felt a hint of playfulness in the air. Things didn't seem to be as simple as he thought. Ha ha! Owner Bu, welcome back to the Serpent Men tribe. Yu Feng saw Bufang from afar, but there was not the slightest hint of disrespect on his face. He respectfully walked over with the Serpent Men elders and said with a big smile. Bufang was not as enthusiastic as the other party, and only lightly nodded his head. Yu Feng felt a little awkward. After all, his enthusiastic greeting was met with a cold response from Bufang. It felt a little strange. Let's cut to the chase. I heard from Anai that Yu Fu doesn't intend to practice cooking with me? Bufang went straight to the point and directly asked Yu Feng. The expression on Yu Feng's face slightly changed, and he awkwardly said, "I doesn't know how to speak. How could Yu Fu not intend to practice cooking with Ownerbu? It is Yu Fu's honor to be able to become Ownerbu's apprentice. It's just that, there was a little unexpected situation, so, what's the situation?" Bufang did not show the slightest trace of politeness, and indifferently asked. When the surrounding serpent men elders saw Bufang's overbearing manner, their complexions did not look too good. After all, Yu Feng was their chieftain, and he represented the prestige of the serpent men tribe. Yet, he was being questioned by a young brat in such a manner. Naturally, they were not in a good mood. "Sir, can you speak with a little more respect? After all, Yu Feng is the chieftain of our serpent men tribe, and he represents the dignity of our tribe. Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to be so overbearing?" the serpent men chieftain said to Bufang with dissatisfaction. Bufang furrowed his brows, and his gaze fell on the serpent men elder. His gaze was somewhat cold. Yu Feng's heart suddenly shivered, and he hurriedly changed the topic. "Ownerbu, it's like this. The last time we called Yu Fu back, it was because there was an urgent matter. A few days ago, our Grand Serpentine City's annual tribal assembly was held. As the daughter of our chieftain, Yu Fu naturally could not be absent. Moreover, Yu Fu has already come of age, and she needed to go to the Grand Serpentine City to receive the Serpentine Sovereign's holy water baptism. Then, what does this have to do with Yu Fu not being my apprentice?" Bufang's gaze fell on Yu Feng once again as he asked. Yu Feng's expression was somewhat awkward, and he continued to say, "Every year, the Grand Serpentine City would select a few talented serpent men from each tribe to enter the city, and they would become residents of the city. These residents would also have the opportunity to become the Serpentine Sovereign's apprentice. Yu Fu was tested to have an astonishing talent, so she was recommended as a candidate to become the Serpentine Sovereign's apprentice. After going through many rounds of selection, she became the Serpentine Sovereign's apprentice." Bufang listened attentively, and he did not interrupt. He knew of the Serpentine Sovereign, and he had even seen one of them in the 100,000 Mountains. That beautiful serpent man had a powerful cultivation, and she even joined hands with the other supreme beings to attack Xiao Bai. Could it be that she was the Serpentine Sovereign? Interesting. Could it be that the Serpentine Sovereign had taken a fancy to Yu Fu's talent, so he wanted to take her as his apprentice, and forbade Yu Fu from learning culinary arts from him? That was a little overbearing. As expected, Yu Feng revealed the reason why Yu Fu couldn't continue learning culinary arts from Bufang. After the Serpentine Sovereign met Yu Fu personally, he decided to pass on his mantle to Yu Fu. In other words, Yu Fu would be the next Serpentine Sovereign, the master of the Grand Serpentine City. With such a noble status, the Serpentine Sovereign naturally wouldn't allow her to continue learning culinary arts from Yu. Yu Feng didn't say anything else after he finished speaking, and he carefully observed Bufang's expression. Bufang squinted his eyes, and he suddenly understood what was going on. So that was the case. The Serpent Men tribe had also benefited from Yu Fu's association. No wonder there was such a huge change. Moreover, the aura of Yu Feng's cultivation had become much more powerful, and he was on the verge of breaking through to 8th grade War God. So it was because Yu Fu had become the successor of the Grand Serpentine City. TSK. Interesting. What is Yu Fu thinking? Could it be that she doesn't want to learn culinary arts from me? Bufang asked as he looked at Yu Feng. Yu Feng's expression suddenly became sluggish, and he started to stammer. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up, and his heart turned cold. It seemed like that was indeed the case. Yu Fu's talent in culinary arts was much more powerful than her talent in cultivation. Moreover, from the fact that Yu Fu diligently practiced her culinary arts every day in the store, Bufang could tell that this serpent woman truly loved culinary art. It was impossible for her to abandon it for the sake of fame and wealth. It was obvious that the serpent men were forcing her. As for how they forced her, Bufang didn't really want to know. He only needed to know that someone was forcing his apprentice to do something she didn't like. The temptation of fame and wealth wasn't something that anyone could resist. A father's status depended on his daughters, and the tribe also benefited from it. The more Bufang thought about it, the angrier he became. His gaze toward Yufeng became somewhat cold. "Speak, why aren't you speaking? What is Yu Fu's opinion?" Bufang asked as he looked at Yufeng coldly. Yufeng licked his lips, feeling a little awkward. What else could Yu Fu's attitude be? She would rather die than submit. She said that she liked to learn culinary arts and wanted to return to the imperial city to study under Bufang. However, how could she miss such an opportunity? What future would there be in learning culinary arts? Even if she was beaten to death, she would still be a chef. Compared to becoming the future Serpentine sovereign, it was like comparing clouds to mud. Yufeng naturally hoped that Yu Fu would become the Serpentine sovereign's disciple. This would be beneficial to both him and the Serpent Men tribe. Moreover, it wasn't a bad thing for Yu Fu. Owner Bu, you should know that becoming the Serpentine sovereign's disciple is a glorious matter that brings honor to the ancestors. The Serpentine sovereign is a supreme being. Yufeng wanted to explain. However, Bufang just waved his hand, not bothering to listen to what he had to say. Becoming the Serpentine sovereign's disciple is an honorable matter, but becoming my Bufang's apprentice is a shameful matter? This decision of yours is very courageous. Bufang sneered coldly. Yufeng didn't say anything else. The Serpent Men elder behind him finally couldn't bear it anymore. Bufang's overbearing attitude infuriated the Serpent Men. Seeing that the negotiations had broken down and that both sides had shed all pretense of cordiality, the Serpent Men elder naturally stepped forward to speak. "Humph! How can you understand the honor of becoming the Serpentine sovereign? What future will Her Highness Yu Fu have by learning culinary arts from you? If she follows the Serpentine sovereign, she will become the Serpentine sovereign's master. You dare to compare yourself to the Serpentine sovereign? Who do you think you are? Are you even worthy?" The Serpent Men elder's words caused Yufeng and Anni's expressions to change. Anni seemed to be somewhat angry as he glared at the Serpent Men elder. Yufeng was also somewhat hesitant, but after thinking about it, he finally sighed and didn't stop him. Indeed, from Yufeng's point of view, becoming the Serpentine sovereign's disciple was much more glorious than becoming Bufang's apprentice. "You shut up." Bufang was not in a good mood. His face turned cold when he heard the nagging elder. With a wave of his hand, green smoke filled the air and a black shadow instantly flew toward the serpent person. This Serpent Man elder was a 7th grade battle saint, so he was naturally not inferior to Bufang. After all, the cultivation level Bufang displayed was merely that of a 7th grade battle saint. Becoming the disciple of a supreme being or becoming the apprentice of a battle saint. Was there even a need to choose between these two? Even a fool would know what to choose. "Humph! How dare you? How dare you act so presumptuously in the Serpent Men tribe?" The Serpent Man elder sneered. True energy immediately burst forth from his body as he sent a palm strike toward the black shadow that Bufang had thrown at him. However, the instant the Serpent Person elder came into contact with the black shadow, his originally confident expression instantly turned ugly. It was because he finally saw the shape of the black shadow clearly. It was actually a wok. When his palm struck the wok, it was as if he had struck a towering mountain. He was unable to move his opponent in the slightest. The momentum of the black wok didn't slow down at all. It directly smashed through the elder's arm, causing it to explode with a bang and turn into a mist of blood. He let out a miserable howl as he looked at the black wok that continued to smash toward him with a face full of terror. Yu Feng's pupils constricted. He watched helplessly as the elder was crushed by Bufong's black wok and crushed to death on the spot. With a wave of his hand, the untainted black wok flew back into Bufong's hand and floated above his palm. You know that the Serpentine Sovereign is a supreme being, but how do you know how powerful I am? Bufong said expressionlessly. Even the Serpentine Sovereign would be smashed silly by his wok, let alone a mere battle saint. Chapter 382. After smashing a serpentman elder into pieces with a single wok, Bufong's aura suddenly soared. With the black turtle constellation wok hovering in his hand, Bufong coldly stared at the serpentman. Blackie raised its doggy head in astonishment. It didn't expect that Bufong could be so domineering, smashing the wok without a word. He had the temperament of the Lord Go. Yu Feng's complexion was extremely unsightly. The serpent men elders behind him were even more enraged. Their gazes toward Bufong were filled with rage. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, Bufong actually dared to kill one of their tribesmen without the slightest scruple. Moreover, it was a 7th-grade battle saint. This was no different from looking down on the serpent men tribe. Yu Feng's complexion was unsightly. He took a deep breath, but he didn't think of pursuing the matter. He didn't have the ability or the courage to do so. He wasn't the Serpentine Sovereign, nor was he a supreme being. Facing Bufong and the lazy fat dog beside Bufong, they could only grit their teeth and swallow their anger. Anai looked at the elder who was smashed to death by Bufong's wok and couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Bufong was his idol. That elder was disrespectful to his idol. Now he was smashed to death. Chief, don't tell me that this arrogant brat before us killed our tribesmen. Aren't you going to do something? The serpent men elders suppressed the anger in their hearts and said to Yu Feng. Their voices were filled with dissatisfaction. Yu Feng had an unspeakable bitterness in his heart. The black turtle constellation wok hovered above Bufong's palm as he coldly looked at them. Hearing the words of the elders, the corners of his mouth curled up and he said, Yu Fu is my Bufong's apprentice. As long as she still loves cooking, no one can deprive her of her right to be a chef. Not you guys, not even the Serpentine Sovereign. Arrogant. The serpent men elders were so angry that their chests were heaving up and down. This is Her Highness Yu Fu's tribe. A human like you is not allowed to act presumptuously here. An old serpent woman roared fiercely. Her eyes emitted a sharp glint. Bufong shot a glance at the old woman. With a wave of his hand, the black turtle constellation wok whizzed out. The old woman's heart trembled and she dodged in fear. She didn't dare to face the wok head-on. The fate of the elder who was smashed into pieces by this wok was still vivid in her mind. She was not a fool, so how could she dare to fight it head-on? Owner Bu, can you give me some face and not cause trouble in my tribe? The lords of the Grand Serpentman City are in our tribe as guests. If you anger them, I'm afraid, Yu Feng said to Bufong with an ugly expression on his face. You want me to give you face when you threaten me? Sure enough, you've grown stronger. The corners of his mouth curved upward into an indifferent smile. Using the experts of the Grand Serpentman City to threaten him? Could it be that the experts of the Grand Serpentman City could make Yu Feng feel so confident? No. How could I dare to threaten Owner Bu? It's just that. I am the chief. I hope that Owner Bu can let me off the hook and not make things difficult for me. Although Yu Feng had the support of the Grand Serpentman City, he still knew how terrifying Bufong was. Therefore, he still tried to be tactful. The black turtle constellation wok flew back into Bufong's hand. Bufong glanced at Yu Feng and said calmly, Fine. As long as Yu Fu goes back with me, everything can be discussed. Yu Feng was put in a difficult position. You brat, you don't know what's good for you. Do you really think our tribe is a pushover? Her Highness Yu Fu is the next Serpentine Sovereign. How can a lowly human brat like you hope to get close to her? At this moment, Many of the elders couldn't bear it anymore and they all shouted. Yu Fu was the Serpent Men tribe's chance to make a comeback. How could they let go of such an opportunity? They weren't fools to let the future Serpentine sovereign, the ruler of the Grand Serpent Men city, leave with a human brat. All the elders attacked furiously, charging toward Bufang. Since they couldn't come to an agreement, they would fight. Elders, stop! Ani's expression changed when he saw this scene. He worshipped Bufang and didn't want Bufang to fall out with the Serpent Men tribe. After all, they were all friends. He swung his serpent tail and blocked the attacks of several Serpent Men elders as he shouted, "Don't worry, Elder Bufang, Elder Bufang." The black turtle constellation wok floated in front of him. The Serpent Men elders' attacks landed on the wok, but it didn't budge at all. Ani's face turned pale. He had just broken through to the Battle Saint realm. Blocking the attacks of so many Battle Saints alone made him feel weak. Bufang pressed on Ani's shoulder and pulled him back. Ani's figure floated behind him. Bufang waved the black turtle constellation wok and blocked the Serpent Men elders' attacks once again. His casual manner caused the Serpent Men elders' expressions to change. Ani, are you trying to betray our Serpent Men tribe? The old serpent woman narrowed her eyes as she looked at the pale-faced Ani and shouted coldly. Ani's body trembled. He opened his mouth and wanted to explain, but he was interrupted by Bufang. Don't try to use the tribe's righteousness to pressure people. You guys only made Yu Fu the Serpentine Sovereign's disciple for your own vanity. You should have asked Yu Fu what she likes. Bufang's palm shrank slightly, and the black turtle constellation wok was actually compressed to the size of a saucer. The Serpentine Sovereign's honor isn't something a human like you can understand. The serpent woman's expression was still cold as she sneered. You're noisy. Bufang indifferently glanced at her and casually waved his hand. The black turtle constellation wok, which had been compressed to the size of a saucer, whizzed out and smashed toward the serpent woman at lightning speed. The serpent woman's expression changed. She wriggled her snake tail and retreated backward, trying to avoid Bufang's attack. However, the speed of the black turtle constellation wok, which had shrunk after being compressed, was simply too fast. With a whooshing sound, it arrived in front of the serpent woman. The serpent woman let out an unwilling roar and pushed her palms forward, trying to push the black turtle constellation wok away. However, the black turtle constellation wok's weight wasn't something a 7th-grade battle saint could push away. It crushed down and directly shattered the serpent woman's palms. The serpent woman let out a shrill scream and was sent flying. Lords of the Serpent Men City, please attack. This arrogant human wants to take Her Highness Yu Fu away. The serpent woman was paralyzed on the ground. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes were filled with extreme hatred. She angrily roared. Yu Feng's expression changed when he heard her roar. He took a step forward and tried to stop the serpent woman from continuing her roar. However, it was too late. Owner Bu, leave quickly. Yu Feng sighed as he looked at Bufang with a complicated expression on his face. The lords of the Serpent Men City were all Supreme Being experts. Although the Black Dog was strong, even if it could stop a Supreme Being expert, the other 8th-grade war gods, including Owner Bu, couldn't stop them. Bufang indifferently glanced at him and remained indifferent. Rumble! In the distance, surging energy soared into the sky. Several snake men shot over from afar, bringing with them a majestic pressure. A fanatical expression appeared on the serpent woman's face. Lord! It's this arrogant human. He wants to take Her Highness Yu Fu away. Who dares to take away the future successor of our Grand Serpent Men City in front of me? Do you want to start a war with our Grand Serpent Men City? A deafening voice resounded as a voice fell from the sky. It was a serpent man with a head full of white hair. His scales emitted a blood-red color and terrifying true energy surged from his body. Without a doubt, he was a supreme being. Bufang was too familiar with the aura of a supreme being. Although the aura of this serpent man expert was much weaker than most of the supreme beings he had met before, he was still a supreme being. The serpent man's eyes were like a blood-colored ball of light, shooting out a red beam of light toward Bufang. There was only one human present, and that was Bufang. His gaze naturally fell on Bufang. Arrogant brat! You're dead meat! The serpent woman's eyes were filled with resentment as her arms were smashed by the black turtle constellation walk. And I was also worried. He tugged at Bufang's sleeves and signaled for Bufang to escape. You really talk a lot. Bufang furrowed his brows. With a single thought, the black turtle constellation walk whizzed out once again. It seemed as though it was going to tear through the air. In an instant, it flew past the serpent woman and smashed her into pieces. She died on the spot. Even if you're a supreme being, so what? It's not a reason to let you live. Bufang's calm voice reverberated in the air, and it caused many people's hearts to tremble. The expression of the supreme being of the serpent men race, who stood proudly in the sky, became ice-cold. His eyes narrowed and his killing intent surged. You dare to kill someone in front of me? You're really arrogant. You're completely looking down on this exalted one. Chapter 383. Ridicule? With a casual pat from Bufang, the golden flames abruptly swelled up and filled the sky with golden flames. As if it had transformed into a sea of fire, it collided with the scarlet flames of the serpent person's sovereign. Yufeng, who was standing not too far away, suddenly changed his expression. Seeing that the serpent man's sovereign seemed to want to attack Bufang, Yufeng's expression became somewhat hesitant. He grasped the spear that had been bounced off, and his figure surged forward. With a tremendous pressure, he charged toward Bufang. The supreme serpent man frowned slightly and said coldly, So, you are the one who wants to take Her Highness Yu Fu away? The serpent man's sovereign sneered and swung his fiery red snake tail. His figure suddenly broke through the air, raising a sky full of flames, which turned into a monstrous giant palm and slapped down on Bufang. The supreme serpent man, who was in so much pain that he found it hard to breathe, went completely berserk. He swung his tail, and his whole body shot out like an arrow. A black spear appeared in his hand, and he pointed it at Bufang as it whistled downwards. Blackie, who was lying beside Bufang, lazily raised its eyes and snorted. The black turtle constellation walk also directly swelled up, as though it had really become a small mountain. Under the control of Bufang's will, it once again smashed towards the supreme serpent man with a golden radiance. As the black turtle constellation walk spun in his hand, Bufang exhaled softly. Were they really going to die? Bufang swept an indifferent glance at the serpent man's supreme being and curled the corner of his mouth. I don't care if this dog knows how to talk or not, I'll just kill it first. Bufang quietly stood at his original spot, without the slightest hint of fear on his face. You little snake, how dare you look down on Lord Go? If Yu Fu is willing to be the successor of this whatever Grand Serpentman City, I naturally won't say anything. However, if you guys are threatening her, as her life teacher in culinary arts, I naturally won't stand idly by, Bufang said. A mere 7th grade battle saint actually dared to challenge the dignity of a supreme being expert. The black turtle constellation walk's momentum didn't decrease as it directly smashed into the wall of fire. The wall of fire that covered the sky was smashed into pieces with a loud bang, and sparks flew in all directions. An illusory dog paw appeared in the sky. Bufang calmly caught it. Then, his true energy surged and directly entered the black turtle constellation walk. The originally black turtle constellation walk's veined patterns suddenly flickered with light. The serpent man's supreme being flicked his long tongue. True energy surged as he smacked his palm toward the black turtle constellation walk. Without the quasi-divine weapon, this human was just an ant that could be squashed to death easily. The Supreme Serpent Man let out a sharp roar with a malevolent expression. The majestic fire seemed to have the power to start a prairie fire, pouring down on Bufang. This human in front of him did not put him, a supreme being, in his eyes at all. How arrogant and reckless was this! At this moment, his desire to kill Bufang had reached its peak. A suppressed rumbling sound came whistling over. This little serpent man really had guts. This time, he raised his dog paw again. Could he even slap a supreme being to death? Blackie grinned, revealing his spotlessly white canine teeth, and let out a gentle and magnetic male voice. Then, facing the Supreme Serpent Man Supreme Being, he smashed the black turtle constellation wok, which had shrunk to the size of a plate. The Supreme Serpent Man Supreme Being felt as if his palm had smashed into a towering mountain, unable to budge it in the slightest. He was greatly alarmed. Beside him, Anai was so frightened that his serpent tail turned limp, and his whole body was trembling. They knew that there was no way to resolve this matter peacefully. Opening his mouth, the 10,000 bestial flames, which had swallowed the scarlet spirit flame, darted into Bufang's mouth and was swallowed. The pressure emitted by a supreme being was not something he could withstand. He transformed into a towering wall of fire, intending to block the black turtle constellation wok. After all, he was a 7th-grade battle saint. To be able to do so, he relied on the god of cooking Set and the heaven and earth obsidian flames. In front of a supreme being, an ordinary 7th-grade battle saint would be slapped to death with a casual wave of his hand. This human actually dared to swallow his spirit flame. This was no different from peeling off his serpent's scales. Last time, this black dog raised its paw and killed several 8th-grade war gods with a single paw. Damn it. My spirit flame. Suddenly, a golden flame gushed out from his mouth. It really is a semi-divine tool. The Supreme Serpent Man Supreme Being looked at the black turtle constellation wok in the sky, and his eyes suddenly revealed a trace of greed. With a long howl, the true energy on his body rose steadily, and scarlet flames suddenly gushed out from his serpent scales. The spear that was swung at the black dog was directly bent by this pressure. What kind of flame was that? Why was it so domineering? At this moment, Yufeng and I, who were not far away, suddenly trembled violently. Their faces were filled with fear as they looked at Blackie, who had raised his doggy paw. They remembered it clearly. Before that, he had to deal with this arrogant human in front of him. Bufang looked at the scene indifferently. He was too lazy to continue controlling the black turtle constellation wok. He just watched as the flames covered the black turtle constellation wok in layers. Greed instantly drowned the mind of the Serpent Man's sovereign. At this moment, he also went all out. The Serpent Man's sovereign immediately burst into laughter, feeling extremely carefree in his heart. He never thought that he would be able to reap such a huge harvest on this trip. Once his spirit fire erases the will on this semi-divine tool, this semi-divine tool will belong to him. In that instant, the Serpent Man's sovereign felt a boundless pressure that caused the scales on his body to stand on end. The pressure had no effect on Bufang at all. It was just that the wind brought about by the pressure blew at Bufang's hair, causing it to whistle in the wind. How could Owner Bu be so calm at this time? The Serpent Man's sovereign stood proudly in the sky and looked down at Bufang. His eyes were filled with killing intent. The scorching temperature instantly filled the entire area. The golden flames swayed and floated in front of Bufang. A sharp and unwilling roar came out of the Serpent Man's sovereign's mouth. The Serpent Man's sovereign's heart trembled and he was dumbfounded. Lord, this Owner Bu is my benefactor. He is also Yu Fu's benefactor. Can you let him go? When this voice came out, the Serpent Man's sovereign, who was rushing over, was startled. What the hell? This dog could actually speak? So, you are the owner of the store that Her Highness Yu Fu can't forget? You have come at the right time. Let me kill you and fulfill Her Highness Yu Fu's wish. Then, she can focus more on the inheritance of our grand serpentine city. The Serpent Man Sovereign's eyes slightly shrank. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a cold smile. As the Serpent Man Sovereign spoke, he stuck out his scarlet tongue. The aura on his body also became more and more intense. This scarlet flame was a kind of spirit flame that the Serpent Man Sovereign obtained in the illusory spirit swamp. Although it was not as powerful as the alchemic fire or the heaven and earth obsidian flame, its power was many times stronger than ordinary flames. Say no more. I have already decided to kill this person, the Serpent Man Sovereign said coldly, directly interrupting Yufeng, who was about to plead for mercy for Bufang. This was his spirit flame, and it was actually swallowed alive. The Serpent Man Sovereign's pressure made Anai and the others' faces turn pale. Black looked at the calm Bufang and immediately rolled his eyes. He knew that this kid was going to trouble the Lord Go. Bufang actually killed an elder of the Serpent Men tribe in front of him. Moreover, that elder was the one who called him over. The spirit flame that burst out from the Serpent Man Sovereign's scales, when faced with the golden flame, was completely defeated. In an instant it collapsed and was forcefully swallowed by the golden flame. However, very quickly, the tears that were almost forced out of his eyes were squeezed back with a swoosh. His eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. Anai almost cried in his heart. The Serpent Man Sovereign's heart was bleeding. With a clang, the black spear hit the black turtle constellation walk, and was sent flying. Blackus snorted and raised its dainty dog paw. The black turtle constellation walk spun and instantly broke free from the fire snake's restraint, returning to Bufang's side. In an instant, the wall of fire turned into a fire snake and wrapped around the black turtle constellation walk. It actually stopped the black turtle constellation walk from moving forward. Blackit took a few lazy cat-like steps and blocked in front of the Serpent Man Sovereign. Roar! The Serpent Man Sovereign's surging waves of energy caused his fur to billow. However, in the next moment, he saw the calm Bufang. He saw a trace of mockery flash in Bufang's eyes. Bang! Then, the Serpent Man's Supreme Being swung his tail in the air. In an instant, boundless true energy surged out of his body and turned into a pressure that seemed to be able to freeze. It pressed down on Bufang. Retrieving the 10,000 bestial flames, Bufang sighed inwardly. The 10,000 bestial flames was a heaven and earth obsidian flame with boundless power. Unfortunately, he couldn't control it at all. Could that golden flame be alchemic fire? What was the background of this human brat? He actually possessed alchemic fire. The black turtle constellation walk shrank and flew back into Bufang's hand. Holding the black turtle constellation walk, Bufang calmly looked at the Serpent Man Sovereign who was charging toward him. What is this thing? Is it a semi-divine tool? Do you expect a fat dog to save you? You've exhausted all your tricks. Damned human! The Serpent Man Sovereign's face was ferocious as he roared. His murderous intent almost solidified. There wasn't the slightest trace of fear in his eyes. He was as calm as the surface of a pond without the slightest ripple. This was an all-out attack due to his embarrassment and anger. When Blackie heard this, he was instantly displeased. What did he mean by counting on a fat dog? Were you looking down on your Lord Go? Ani's heart was filled with despair. The Serpent Man Sovereign's crimson tail swayed slightly, stirring up a wave of energy in the air. A slightly scorching sensation permeated the surroundings, causing the pores on one's body to open up involuntarily. However, Bufang wasn't worried because he wasn't fighting alone. After all, Bufang's cultivation was only at the 7th grade. The Serpent Man Sovereign's walk was directly smacked away. Damn it! Go to hell! The speed of the walk was extremely fast. The air seemed to be collapsing under the pressure of the walk. If he could obtain this semi-divine tool, his combat prowess would definitely reach a new height. Bufang's face suddenly flushed red. Then, he opened his mouth. The Serpent Man Sovereign's body trembled. His serpentine pupils shrank as his entire body was sent flying far away in the air. However, the Serpent Man's sovereign's surprise only lasted for a moment. In the next moment, the long spear wrapped with a sharp energy swept toward Blackie. If he wanted to truly fight against a Serpent Man sovereign, the current Bufang couldn't do it. His mind trembled. The phantom dog's paw fiercely slapped down on him. The black turtle constellation walk flew back to Bufang's hand and floated above his palm. Bufang slightly raised his eyes and looked at the Serpent Man sovereign who was hovering in the sky. This power was extremely terrifying. Chapter 384. The limp Serpent Man Supreme Being was being dragged by Bufang, not showing any signs of moving at all. It was as if he was already dead. These sea spirit beasts followed the waves and surged toward the illusory spirit swamp. He originally thought that Bufang was stronger than the Grand Serpentine City. Who would have thought that Owner Bu's resources were not any weaker than the Grand Serpentine Cities? The Serpent Man Supreme Being's eyes suddenly shrank when he saw a figure appear in front of him. Dark clouds seemed to roll in from the horizon, covering the sky and the sun. Bufang dragged the unconscious Serpent Man Supreme Being up from the ground. He grabbed the Serpent Man's tail and turned to look at Unai. The Supreme Being expert of the Grand Serpentine City was actually vomited blood by a dog's paw. Let's go. You lead the way. Bufang looked at Unai. His expression softened as he said. Even the Serpent Men, who often roamed the seas, had never seen 100-meter-tall giant wave before. As the waves rolled, the gold shone brilliantly. Unai was the most excited among the crowd. He looked at Bufang with excitement and admiration. Holding the black turtle constellation walk, Bufang exhaled softly. Then, he stomped on the ground with the tip of his foot, causing the mud on the ground to splatter everywhere. Terrifying energy gathered in the air and formed the phantom of a dog's paw. Yu Feng's face was extremely unsightly. He opened his mouth and said, "Owner Bu." Bufang's figure moved. He stomped on the ground and his body shot out. He had seen how terrifying this black walk was. Even a Supreme Being expert couldn't send it flying. It was enough to show how powerful it was. Yu Feng's bloodshot eyes widened, and his whole body trembled violently. After all, Bufang was a human. Even though the Serpent Man was half a snake, he was still a human. Oh my God! What happened? What happened just now? Bufang really couldn't do something as insane as eating people. Don't talk. If you say another word, I'm afraid I won't be able to stop myself from knocking you out. Compared to the Grand Serpentine City, what did Owner Bu have to fear? From time to time, there would be Naga guards from Grand Serpentine City patrolling the area with weapons in their hands. They were responsible for the port's safety. Bang! This stone tower was built by the Grand Serpentine City. It was used as a watchtower to observe the waves of the vast ocean. The Naga supremacy was directly pressed to the ground. Her entire body sunk deep into the swamp. Bufang grabbed the Serpent Man Supreme Being's tail and followed Ani's figure slowly. Bufang held the black turtle constellation walk in one hand and looked at him expressionlessly. Then, he swung the black walk down and ruthlessly smashed the head of the Serpent Man Supreme Being. Dong, below the precipitous cliff was a boundless ocean with surging waves. This familiar feeling of fear. That's right. This black dog was indeed that terrifying black dog. Its green tail swayed in the air, and its head of green hair spread out in a sinister manner. This doomsday-like scene caused the Serpent Men on the wooden ships to roar in fear. One after another, they leaped out of the ships and madly ran toward the shore. The Serpent Man Supreme Being let out a shrill cry. Many wooden ships anchored in the harbor. Their sails swayed, emitting a loud crashing sound. This sound was deafening, and it caused people's minds to tremble involuntarily. Rumble, then, a huge dog paw print appeared on the ground. Crushed stones flew everywhere, and the stinky swamp mud surged out, making the surroundings extremely filthy. His entire body shivered, and cold sweat trickled down his back. He even dared to eat a supreme being. What else did Owner Boo not dare to eat? The surrounding serpent men experts were instantly dumbfounded. Why did such a terrifying pressure appear? If it weren't for the weak breathing, which proved that he was still alive, the crowd would have thought that a supreme being was smashed to death by a black walk. The ground of the serpent men tribe, which wasn't very sturdy to begin with, was directly smashed to pieces. The swamp mud beneath it splashed up into the sky. The faint warm sunlight shone down from the heavens, shining on the clear and crystalline surface of the sea. It was like crumbled gold scattered all over the ground. However, he didn't know that his action almost caused Yufeng's heart to soften. The serpent men on the wooden ships all sprawled on the deck in fear, looking at the pitch-black horizon in the distance. And the target of Bu Fang's black turtle constellation walk was precisely this 8th-grade war god. Monstrous waves rolled over, stirring up thousands of gales. The sea wind whistled, and the dark clouds slowly shrouded the illusory spirit swamp. Yufeng suddenly felt a tinge of regret. He felt that he had made an extremely foolish decision. Now, this walk actually wanted to smash him without any warning. How could he not be scared to death? The Supreme Being's eyeballs almost popped out of their socket. His whole body slumped to the ground, unable to crawl back up. The heavy black turtle constellation walk displayed its terrifying might. Bufang didn't say anything. With a thought, the black turtle constellation walk flew toward the serpent men experts who came with the Supreme Being. This village was only a temporary base for them, a place to stay in the sea. Their houses were actually located in the Grand Serpentine City. Those were ferocious eyes. Within the several hundred-meter-tall waves, there were actually many powerful sea spirit beasts. Because the sea was full of unknowns, some unknown sea spirit beasts would occasionally crawl out of the sea and cause harm to the village and the harbor. These guards were formed to deal with these sea spirit beasts. Along with the unceasing rolling of the horizon, a tyrannical roar resounded. The black turtle constellation walk floated above Bu Fang's palm. His emotionless gaze swept over the frightened serpent men. Blackie rolled its eyes, seemingly bored. Then, with a wave of its paw, the ground seemed to be overturned by its paw. The Supreme Being's complexion became extremely frightened. His eyes were filled with disbelief. He let out a long howl as he tried to break free from the shackles. Were their eyes playing tricks on them, or was this Supreme Being expert a fake? Do you know where the Grand Serpentine City is? Do you know where Yufu is? How was this possible? He grabbed the black turtle constellation walk with one hand and ferociously smacked the 8th-grade war god Serpent Man's head. With a dull thud, the 8th-grade war god Serpent Man was struck dumb. His head was filled with stars as he fainted. The ground seemed to suddenly tremble. In the west of the illusory spirit swamp, the Supreme Being's complexion was ferocious. He crazily roared, as if he was about to go crazy. His scarlet tail swayed unceasingly as he tried to break free from the frightening energy. Most of these serpent men were 7th-grade battle saints. Among them there was an 8th-grade war god. A black dog that could even kill a Supreme Being with a single swipe of his paw. Then I nodded. She glanced at the Supreme Being's serpent man and sucked in a breath of air. She grinned, twisted her waist, and crawled forward. Her beautiful eyes gazed into the distance. She could vaguely see the silhouette within the waves. She sucked in a breath of air, and her towering chest heaved up and down. Swoosh, swoosh, rumble, boom. It's a pity that he's a serpent man. If he didn't have a human body, he would probably be a delicious Supreme Being ingredient. Then, amidst the swirling swamp, a serpent man's silhouette was directly smacked away. He shot out explosively and landed on the ground. On top of the cliff, there was a huge stone tower. A fishy and salty sea breeze blew past, bringing with it a vast smell. As the waves surged, they crashed against the reefs under the cliff and let out thunderous sounds. Streaks of red light flickered from the waves, as if they were shooting out beams of light. With such a frightening dog here, and the iron lump puppet that had yet to appear, was this really a dog's paw? With the harbor as the center, a small village was formed. However, this village was actually inhabited by serpent-men fishermen who were preparing to go to the sea. Damned human! The Supreme Being opened his mouth, revealing his sharp fangs, and bellowed at Bufang. However, the exquisite dog's paw continued to exert force. Like the sound of bones breaking, the Supreme Being's shriek came to an abrupt end. She coughed out blood, and her body fell limply onto the ground. The serpent-men elders who were waiting to see Bufang's miserable end all fell limply onto the ground. They looked at the plump dog, and then at the expressionless Bufang. The serpent-men expert who tried to defend hastily bent his arm, and the black wak smashed into his head, sending him flying. Could it be that the oceanic species experts want to invade our illusory spirit swamp? Why is this happening? The war god expert was still immersed in blackest terror, and had yet to regain his senses. He suddenly turned his head, only to discover that a black wak was silently smashing toward him. At the bottom of the cliff was a huge harbor. Many experts of the Serpent People tribe would enter the sea from there to capture food ingredients in the sea and obtain some ingredient. This owner Bu actually planned to eat the Supreme Being? And I was taken aback for a moment, and then a divine light shot out from his eyes. I know, Owner Bu. I will bring you there now. Bufang picked up the Supreme Being's limp scarlet tail, and looked at it. In the end, he let out a sigh, and with a smack, he threw the tail away. Ignoring the other serpent-men experts, Bufang swept a glance at the serpent-men tribe's elders. The elders who were clamoring a moment ago suddenly did not even dare to breathe loudly. They lowered their heads, and did not even dare to let out a fart. An air-piercing sound rang out, and a beautiful figure glided down from the sky, floating in the air. His figure burst out, and appeared in front of the Supreme Being, who was struggling to crawl up from the ground. His long spear was actually bent by a terrifying force, and was on the verge of breaking. However, Black's mouth twitched, and it snorted in disdain. Its paw continued to press down. After doing all this, Blackie opened its doggy mouth, and as if it was yawning, it took lazy cat-like steps back to Bufang's side. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and their minds trembled violently, as if their hearts were about to jump out of their chests. The Serpent-Man War God, who hurriedly waved his arm to smash the black wak away, suddenly slapped his palm on the black turtle constellation wak. A solemn expression appeared on the Serpentine Sovereign's beautiful face. Looking at the several hundred-meter-tall waves surging toward them, her heart felt somewhat stifled. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Bufang indifferently glanced at Serpent-Man Yufeng, and indifferently said. He waved the black turtle constellation wak in his hand, and it scared Yufeng so much that he swallowed back the words he was about to say. All of a sudden, a sharp cry of alarm came from the Serpent-Man who was preparing to leave. Chapter 385. The Oceanic Tribe was one of the races living in the vast ocean. It was formed by the evolution of numerous sea spirit beasts, which gave birth to intelligence. There were many different kinds of sea spirit beasts, and they all had different appearances. When so many races came together, they were known as the Oceanic Tribe. The Oceanic Tribe was extremely powerful. After all, they controlled the vast ocean. Compared to the creatures on land, they were much more valiant. The Serpentine Sovereign naturally knew about the existence of the Oceanic Tribe. She held them in awe. Even though her strength had reached the peak of the Supreme Being realm, she knew that the Oceanic Tribe definitely had experts who had broken through the shackles of the Supreme Being realm. Originally, she planned to enter the boundless ocean after dealing with the matters in the Grand Serpentine City. She wanted to find an opportunity to break through. At that time, she would need to come into contact with the oceanic tribe. However, things always inadvertently exceeded her expectations. Hidden within the towering waves were numerous sea spirit beasts. The eyes of these sea spirit beasts were filled with brutality. They didn't have the slightest bit of benevolence. It was obvious that the experts in the ocean didn't come with good intentions. What are they doing here? Why would the oceanic tribe suddenly attack my illusory spirit swamp? The Serpentine Sovereign furrowed her brows. If the towering waves hit the ground, the first target of the sea spirit beasts would be the Grand Serpentine City. Even though the Grand Serpentine City was powerful, it was still a little difficult to deal with so many sea spirit beasts. The Serpentine Sovereign felt a headache coming on. She still couldn't understand why the sea spirit beasts would invade their illusory spirit swamp. Compared to the vast resources in the ocean, the illusory spirit swamp had nothing that could attract the experts of the oceanic tribe in the ocean. All of a sudden, the Serpentine Sovereign's heart shook. Could it be a crystal mine that had just been excavated? But how could a mere crystal mine attract the experts of the oceanic tribe to attack the illusory spirit swamp? Could it be that there is some treasure in the crystal mine? A pensive expression appeared on the Serpentine Sovereign's beautiful face. In the torrential waves in the distance, a massive fish opened its mouth, and there were several blue-skinned silhouettes standing in its mouth. These figures looked at the precipitous cliff from afar with cold expressions. The Serpentine Sovereign's gaze seemed to pierce through the void, meeting the gaze of the expert in the mouth of the giant fish. The Serpentine Sovereign sucked in a breath of cold air. She discovered that among the blue-skinned experts in the mouth of the giant fish, there were actually quite a few Supreme Being auras among them. Even though the Serpentine Sovereign was far away, she could not help but feel her heart tremble. Damn it! The Serpentine Sovereign cursed under her breath. A trace of anxiety appeared on her beautiful face. Then, with a swing of her serpentine tail, she suddenly soared into the sky and flew toward the Grand Serpentine City. As she flew, she took out a white sword talisman. The Serpentine Sovereign bit her red lips as she looked at the white cloud pattern on the sword talisman. Her face was filled with hesitation. In the end, he seemed to have thought of something, and he sighed leisurely and crushed the sword talisman. The white cloud villa stood in the depths of the illusory spirit swamp. Amidst the fluttering white clouds, a luxurious villa stood tall. Within the villa, there were pavilions, terraces and pavilions, small bridges and flowing water. Dense spiritual energy surrounded the villa, making it seem like a paradise. In a small house, a figure who was sitting cross-legged suddenly opened his eyes. Wu Mu's eyes were filled with sword energy. His brows slightly furrowed as he turned his head in the direction of the Grand Serpentine City. The sword talisman was crushed. Is Dooley calling for me? Did she meet with some kind of crisis? Wu Mu stood up, his breath slightly fluctuating. Ever since he returned from the light-wind Imperial City, he had been in seclusion to recuperate. Even though his physical injuries were mostly healed after he drank a bowl of soup in the store, the Shura sect overlord's shattered sword intent had caused his spirit to suffer a heavy blow. Even though the soup was miraculous, it was still difficult for him to recover from his mental injuries. A light green longsword whizzed out from his back, and the door to the house suddenly opened. Wu Mu stepped on the flying sword and immediately shot out. Within the White Cloud Villa, a few people's auras also rose up. Then, several figures stepped on flying swords and appeared in the air. They looked at Wu Mu in confusion. Wu Mu didn't say anything and only gave a few instructions. Then, with his hands clasped behind his back, he elegantly stepped on the flying sword and flew out of the villa. After Wu Mu left the villa. Within the villa, Wu Yunbai, who was bored to death and was strolling around, suddenly had her eyes lit up. She looked at the place where her father had left and narrowed her eyes. In the next moment, she stealthily ran out of the White Cloud Villa. The Grand Serpentine City was majestic. Its city walls were even taller than the Light Wind Empire's imperial city. The bricks used to build the city walls were also extremely sturdy. Moreover, there seemed to be a mysterious magic array engraved on the city walls that protected it from being destroyed. Above the city walls, there were serpent men guards clad in armor patrolling the area. They were the guardians of the Grand Serpentine City. All of a sudden, the pupils of the guards on the city walls shrank as they brandished their spears and aimed at a distant place. In that direction, two figures slowly emerged from the miasma that pervaded the air. One of them was a serpent man, while the other was a human. That was because humans walked on two legs, which was clearly different from serpent men. Why would a human come to the Grand Serpentine City? What was he trying to do? Wait. Hiss. The guards on the city walls immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Their pupils shrank as they looked at the serpent tail in the human's hand. The scarlet tail was connected to a serpent man who was being dragged like a dead dog. That serpent King Doom. How did he become like this? Below the Serpentine Sovereign was the Serpentine King. There were 3 Serpentine Kings in the Grand Serpentine City, and each of them had the strength of a Supreme Being. A Supreme Being Serpentine King was being dragged like a dead dog. How could they not be shocked? Enemy attack! The guards who came to their senses immediately let out roars of rage. The densely packed guards on the city walls defended the city so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. A serpent man, who seemed to be the commander, coldly stared at the slowly approaching Bufang. "Sir, please stop. Put down Serpent King Doom and leave the Grand Serpentine City. Otherwise, the experts of the Grand Serpentine City will attack and kill you." Bufang slowly raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Through the miasma, he saw a large group of serpent men standing on the majestic city walls. The serpent men all emitted murderous intent, and their target was Bufang. Numerous icy-cold spears were waiting to be shot out. As long as Bufang took another step forward, those sharp spears would be hurled down one after another. "All right, you should leave first. Don't get involved." Bufang turned his head and looked at An, indicating for him to leave first. An's expression slightly changed, but after thinking about it, he didn't refuse. The army of the Grand Serpentine City was much stronger than the army of the Light Wind Empire. Facing a human who was suspected to have beaten the Supreme Being Serpentine King into a dead dog, they actually didn't retreat. Although it was because they had the Serpentine Sovereign to rely on, at least they were more courageous than the human army. After all, they were the elite troops of the Serpentine Sovereign, and they were able to kill their way out of the illusory spirit swamp. "Hand over Yufu, and I will let this guy go," Bufang said calmly, waving the serpent's tail in his hand. His voice wasn't loud, but it spread out, and the serpent men on the city walls heard it clearly. The expressions of the serpent men on the city walls changed, and the way they looked at Bufang became more and more ferocious. This human's target was Her Highness Yufu, the future successor of the Grand Serpentine City. The future Serpentine Sovereign of the Grand Serpentine City. What a delusional human. Damn it. Inside a majestic castle in the Grand Serpentine City. In a sealed palace, serpent men with powerful cultivation bases stood in the main hall, guarding a beautiful serpent man in the middle of the hall. Yufu's complexion was somewhat haggard, and her hands were bound by an ice-cold chain. Her movements were restricted within the palace. She felt somewhat sorrowful in her heart. She didn't expect that after returning to the Serpent Men tribe and participating in a tribal gathering, she would become the successor of the Serpentine Sovereign. Compared to becoming the successor of the Serpentine Sovereign, she hoped to become Onorbu's apprentice more. Every day, she would wake up early to practice her knife techniques, learn how to carve, cook dishes that emitted an alluring fragrance, and savor her own cooking skills. She originally thought that the Serpentine Sovereign would respect her opinion, but she didn't expect that she would be rejected by the Serpentine Sovereign when she told him about it. She was even imprisoned here. Thinking about how she would never be able to return to Fong Fong's little store to learn how to cook, Yu Fu couldn't hide the sorrow in her heart. The palace's gate suddenly opened. A beautiful figure whizzed through the gate and landed in the center of the palace. It was the noble and elegant Serpentine Sovereign. Her green hair was draped over her shoulders, and her graceful figure swayed as she came to Yu Fu's side. Her beautiful eyes fell on Yu Fu, and there was a hint of coldness and pity in them. "Why do you have to do this? Becoming my successor is the dream of many serpent men. Why are you so stubborn?" Yu Fu pouted and looked at the Serpentine Sovereign pitifully, as if she wanted to beg the Serpentine Sovereign to let her go. "If you didn't have the physique and talent to become the Serpentine Sovereign, I naturally wouldn't stop you. However, with your physique and talent, you are destined to inherit my mantle. I will soon leave the Grand Serpentine City, and the city cannot be without a ruler for even a day. This is your mission, and this is your destiny. Even if you don't want to accept it, you have to accept it. In the past, this was the same for me." The Serpentine Sovereign stretched out her slender and delicate hand. Her fair and slender palm was like a beautiful jade, and as it caressed Yu Fu's face, a trace of nostalgia and sorrow appeared on her beautiful face. Yu Fu's complexion turned pale, and she couldn't hide the sorrow in her heart. Suddenly, the palace's gate was opened. A serpent man guard rushed into the palace in a panic and reported respectfully to the Serpentine Sovereign. "Reporting. Your Majesty, there is a human outside the city holding Serpentine King Du Mu's body, and he wants to kill his way into the city." The Serpentine Sovereign's hand that was caressing Yu Fu's cheek suddenly froze, and her expression turned ice-cold. She turned her head to look at the guard and said indifferently, "Serpentine King Du Mu? Didn't he go to Yu Fu's tribe? Why is his body being held by a human? Pass down my order. Ask the other two Serpentine Kings to capture that human for me. How dare he humiliate the Serpentine King of the Grand Serpentine City?" Her ice-cold voice reverberated in the palace. Yu Fu was a little stunned. A human had killed his way into her tribe. Could it be? Owner Bu. Chapter 386. After the Serpentine Sovereign gave the order, a majestic aura gushed out from the two luxuriously decorated mansions in the Serpentmen City. Two beams of vital energy shot up into the sky, and two serpentmen emerged from it, standing proudly in the sky. The aura exuding from these two serpentmen was extremely frightening. The air seemed to rumble and tremble as they moved. They were the two Serpentine Kings, the supreme being experts of the Grand Serpentmen City. The two of them looked at each other from afar and saw the iciness in each other's eyes. One of them was a serpent man. His upper body was that of a human, and his muscles were like those of a horned dragon. His skin was covered with blue-veined patterns. His eyes were like lightning, as if they were shooting out lightning bolts. Sizzling blue lightning arcs shuttled around his body, illuminating his blue serpent tail. This was the Serpentine King of the Grand Serpentmen City, a mid-stage supreme being expert, Du Kai. The other Serpentine King was also a snake woman. She had a slender and alluring waist, and there was a purple cloth wrapped around her chest, covering her ample bosom. On her exquisite face, there was a seductive look in her eyes. Her purple hair fluttered in the wind, and her purple serpent tail swayed in the air. This person was the last Serpentine King of the Grand Serpentmen City, a late-stage supreme being expert, Du Wei. Among the three Serpentine Kings, Du Mu was the weakest. This was also the reason why the Serpentine Sovereign trusted the two Serpentine Kings to take action. Moreover, the Grand Serpentine City did not only have these three Serpentine Kings. The Grand Serpentmen City was bordered by the vast ocean to the west, and the White Cloud Villa to the east. Moreover, it was overseen by the illusory Spirit Swamp. Without such a strong foundation, it would be difficult for the Grand Serpentmen City to remain intact. The two Serpentmen Kings swung their tails, then suddenly shot out of the void and rapidly sped out of the city. The Serpentine Sovereign clasped her hands behind her back. Her eyes were like lightning as she coiled her serpent tail and stood in front of the main hall. Her brows were tightly furrowed, and a trace of melancholy appeared on her face. She was not worried about the human who wanted to attack the Grand Serpentmen City. How could a human understand the Grand Serpentmen City's foundation? If a mere human was able to break into the Grand Serpentine City, it would have long been erased from the illusory spirit swamp. Right now, she was worried about the 100-meter-tall waves that were rolling towards her from the vast ocean. She was worried about the countless sea spirit beasts hidden within the waves, as well as the oceanic species experts who were riding the waves. Compared to the ignorant humans, the experts of the oceanic tribe were a bigger headache for her. They could even threaten the survival of the Grand Serpentine City. Bufang exhaled softly. It continued to drag its scarlet tail behind it as it walked toward the Grand Serpentmen City step by step. His face was expressionless as he stared at the large group of snake people on the towering city wall. At this moment, the gates of the Grand Serpentmen City were slowly closing up. The sound of chains being pulled could be heard as the gates, which were made of metal, were slowly being pulled up. The gates were about to be sealed shut. The leader of the Naga guards roared at Bufang, telling him to stop. However, Bufang did not care and continued walking forward. The Serpent King Du Mu fell to the ground like a dead dog as he was dragged by Bufang. The guards on the city wall were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their socket. However, at the same time, they were also frightened. After all, Du Mu was a supreme being expert. Serpent men battle spears. Shoot! As Bufang took a step forward, the roar of the leader of the guards on the city wall resounded in his ears. The pupils of the Serpentmen guards on the city wall shrank. Then, they all revealed their hideous fangs. True energy surged in their hands, and sharp spears emitted an ice-cold glint as they were shot down from the city wall. Bufang raised his head and looked at the sky, which had turned pitch-black due to the numerous spears. He squinted his eyes. With a thought, a wisp of black smoke curled up and the black turtle constellation walk floated in the air. As true energy surged in, the black turtle constellation walk expanded rapidly. Then, it hovered above Bufang's head and fell down, protecting Bufang's figure. Swoosh! Swoosh! The numerous spears were hurled down with the sound of breaking the air. They covered the sky and covered the sun, turning it pitch black. All the Serpentmen held their breath. Suddenly, the eyes of the leader of the Serpentmen guards shrank. He saw the long spears collide with something solid, making a clanking sound. Faint sparks spread out. The long spears that filled the sky were all blocked. A huge black wok floated in front of them. The black wok, which had been hit by countless long spears, was not damaged at all. There was not a single mark left on it. What was this thing? The leader of the Serpentmen guards sucked in a breath of cold air. The hair on his body stood on end. As expected of a human who could defeat the Serpent King Du Mu. He was indeed extraordinary. Rip! In the sky, a tall and sturdy Serpentman flew over. It was a Serpentman man whose body flickered with light blue electric arcs. With a sizzling sound, a lightning-long blade was caught in the Serpentman's hand. The graceful Serpentine King Du Wei arrived. She gently landed in the middle of the Serpentine guards. Her seductive eyes were looking at the human below with interest. A smile appeared on her peerlessly beautiful face. Then, she gently snapped her fingers, turned to look at the Serpentman guard, and said in a soft voice, "Open the great formation guarding the city gate. Give this human a big present." The leader of the Serpentmen guards shrank his eyes. He looked at Serpentman King Du Wei in surprise. Could the Serpentman King be serious? Open up a formation. Big Sister wants to play with this human. Du Wei raised her slender finger. Her seductive red lips parted, and her small tongue stuck out. She licked her finger and smiled. The leader of the Serpent Men guards instantly shivered. He ran away as fast as he could. In a short while, the top of the city wall flickered. On the city wall in front of Du Wei, a beam of light appeared. Then, a magic array that was formed by two arrays intertwined with each other appeared. Serpentine King Du Wei's slender palm pressed against the formation. Immediately, the two opposite rotating formations began to rotate faster and faster. A white ball of light gathered in front of the magic array. Boom! A loud explosion sounded. That Serpent King Du Kai was taken aback for a moment. Then, his hair was blown up by a gust of wind. The corner of Du Kai's mouth twitched. He turned his head and saw Du Wei leaning against the city wall. Her chest was constantly jiggling. That prodigal woman was laughing like a flower. Was this city-guarding magic array for fun? Du Kai's heart was filled with anger. With a loud explosion, Bufang furrowed his brows as he looked at the ball of light that was rapidly flying toward him. His heart couldn't help but shiver. This ball of light gave him a strong sense of danger. With a thought, the black turtle constellation walk suddenly revolved. It once again turned upside down to protect him. The ball of light ruthlessly smashed onto the black turtle constellation walk. With a loud bang, Bufang felt his eardrums tremble. His vision turned black. The power of a mere ball of light was actually so frightening. This is an array cannon. I didn't think that a city in this remote place would have this kind of thing. Even though this array cannon is very outdated. Black's magnetic voice resounded. It seemed to be explaining something to Bufang. It raised its eyes and glanced at Bufang, who was still in a daze after being bombarded by the cannons. It couldn't help but twitch its mouth. Array cannon? What the hell? The black turtle constellation walk shrunk and floated above Bufang's palm. He still felt a little dizzy. The explosive power of the ball of light was very strong. Moreover, the aftermath of the explosion also made Bufang feel a little dizzy. On the city wall, Du Wei's red lips slightly parted. Her eyes were filled with astonishment. This human really has some tricks up his sleeves. He can even block the array cannon, as expected of the person who can deal with Du Mu. He's worthy of this sister's help. Du Wei licked her red lips with her small tongue and smiled charmingly. In the sky, Du Kai's eyes narrowed. He let out a roar. His voice exploded like thunder. Rumble! A frightening aura instantly filled the air. Bufang's heart shuddered. This serpent man's aura was much stronger than Du Mu's. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Du Kai glanced at Bufang. He realized that Bufang's cultivation level was only a 7th grade battle saint. He suddenly felt a little puzzled. An expert who could deal with Du Mu, could it be that he was only a 7th grade battle saint? Du Mu, this fellow, was really regressing the more he cultivated. A several 100-meter-long thunder blade shot out from the hands of the Serpent Man King Du Kai, who was floating in the sky, and slashed at Bufang. The blade slashed through the air with crackling sounds, causing many serpent men to feel awe. This was the Serpent Man King, the incomparably powerful Serpent Man King. Bufang's brows furrowed. He held the black turtle constellation walk with one hand and his chest expanded. Then, his face suddenly flushed red, and a golden flame gushed out from his mouth. Once the heaven and earth obsidian flame appeared, the temperature immediately rose. The flame gushed out and collided with the thunder blade. Instantly they collided with each other. Du Kai's pupils shrank. He exclaimed inwardly, "What a powerful flame! No wonder Du Mu was dealt with. After all, among the 3 Serpent Men Kings, only Du Mu plays with fire." However, compared to the flame of this human in front of him, Du Mu's flame was more than a level lower. But even so, so what? The corners of Du Kai's mouth curled up, revealing his sharp fangs. The thunder in his hand flourished, and the thunder blade swung again. It actually turned into a ferocious thunder snake that coiled around its body. It dodged the mystic flame and pounced at Bufang. Compared to a supreme being expert, Bufang's cultivation was still much weaker. Blackus strode forward with its lazy cat-like step, its dainty doggy paw slightly raised, and the phantom of a doggy paw suddenly rushed out. Boom! Bufang retracted the heaven and earth obsidian flame. Du Kai's thunder snake was also caught by the doggy paw. With a sudden pull, Du Kai, who was in the sky, slightly staggered. In the next moment, under the dumbfounded gazes of all the serpent men, the fat dog that caught the thunder snake casually waved its hand and stuffed the thunder snake into its mouth. What the f***ck? You even want to eat thunder? Aren't you afraid of being electrocuted to death? Du Kai's heart jumped and Du Wei's charming eyes widened. The two supreme beings of the Serpentmen City were both shocked. Chapter 387. In the sky above the illusory spirit swamp, a metallic warship rumbled as it slowly sped through the sky, stirring up a violent gust of wind. As the wind blew, the water in the swamp splashed in all directions. Swamp mud swirled in the air as a fishy stench filled the air. This was an extremely majestic warship that floated in the sky. On the deck of the warship, a figure stood upright. A powerful aura emanated from his body, as if he wanted to pull in the heavens and earth. Within the illusory spirit swamp, swamp mud would occasionally be sent flying. Spirit beasts would be exposed and flee in a panic. There were even more ferocious 8th-grade spirit beasts that bared their fangs at the metal warship in the sky. However, when the eyes of the experts standing on the deck moved, the 8th-grade spirit beasts were frightened to the point that they let out a miserable wail and fled, as if they were trying to flee. Executive Feng looked down at the illusory spirit swamp from above. The spirit swamp, which was extremely dangerous to the experts of the southern region, was incomparably safe to the experts of the Grand Baron sect. It couldn't even be considered a dangerous place. There wasn't even a divine physique echelon divine beast in the illusory spirit swamp. Naturally, the Grand Baron sect's experts wouldn't be too worried. The metal door of the warship emitted a heavy creaking sound. Then, from within the cabin, many experts walked out. These were all disciples of the Grand Baron sect, and their auras were extremely powerful. An old man suddenly walked up to Executive Feng's side and whispered a few words. Executive Feng's expression, which had remained calm all this while, suddenly changed. His brows furrowed. "You're saying that Liang Kai, one of the sect's 10 great sons of heaven, has found out about the existence of a heaven and earth obsidian flame in the training ground and is already on his way here?" The elder solemnly nodded his head. Executive Feng's face immediately became a little ugly. He felt a little sinister. The Grand Baron sect's 10 great sons of heaven were all 10th grade divine echelon expert. Not only were they extremely talented, but their combat prowess was even more terrifying. Every one of them had their own trump cards and were extremely difficult to deal with. If a son of heaven came for the heaven and earth obsidian flame, then this heaven and earth obsidian flame might really have nothing to do with him. Moreover, if the geniuses found out that there was actually a big crystal mine in the training ground, he might even be robbed of his contribution. The competition within the Grand Baron sect was just as fierce. If one wanted cultivation resources, they had to fight for them themselves. Executive Feng took a deep breath. Then, his eyes narrowed, as though a ray of light was flashing past. "Speed up the warships. We need to take down that big crystal mine as soon as possible." As for the heaven and earth obsidian flame, it was not his concern. Even if it was the weakest heaven's pride in the sect, Executive Feng might not be qualified to compete with him. Therefore, he could only strive to collect the Yuan crystal mine before the heaven's pride arrived and report it to the sect. Monstrous waves rolled over, covering the sky. As the waves rolled, they emitted a deafening sound, as if they were about to burst one's eardrums. As the waves got closer, the figures of some spirit beasts in the 100-meter-tall waves became more obvious. The ferocious and roaring sea spirit beasts carried a terrifying pressure as they charged toward the precipitous cliff. Numerous blue-skinned oceanic species experts walked on the waves, their gazes fixed on the illusory spirit swamp. Among them, there was an oceanic species expert with a mouth full of ferocious fangs. He was riding a spirit beast covered in sharp armor. It was a shrimp-type spirit beast with a vigorous aura. Its body was divided into many segments, and on its head were sharp fangs and two sickle-like claws. It had a pair of compound eyes that looked like handles, and white foam spewed from its mouth as it steadily treaded on the waves. This was a supreme sea spirit beast, the deep-sea mantis prawn. It was several meters long and looked like an ancient, ferocious beast with a monstrous aura. Our oceanic species sage prophesied that the prawn ancestor will be born in the illusory spirit swamp. If we can find the prawn ancestor, our oceanic species will definitely be able to walk out of this narrow sea under the supreme might of the prawn ancestor and head toward the vast ocean. A blue-skinned expert riding on the back of the shrimp-type spirit beast opened his mouth full of sharp fangs. His gurgling eyes were filled with excitement. As if he had thought of something exciting, this oceanic species expert opened his cheeks and seawater instantly gushed out from his cheek. He let out a sharp roar that soared into the sky, causing the oceanic species experts on the huge waves to respond in unison. For a moment, the sharp roars connected together and soared into the sky. It was incomparably noisy. The precipitous cliff of the illusory spirit swamp gradually became clearer in the eyes of the oceanic species expert. Blackie curled his tongue and swallowed the light blue lightning. He grinned and seemed to be in a good mood. Bufang was also a little surprised. It turned out that the Lord Go had this hobby. He liked to eat lightning. It seemed like he was getting easier to feed. After Du Kai and Du Wei recovered from their shock, their hearts sank and their faces became incomparably grave. They looked at the black dog with much more caution. A mere 7th-grade battle saint was able to kill a supreme being expert and drag him along. He must have some kind of trump card. To be able to swallow a lightning bolt from a supreme being expert like Du Kai in one gulp, this black dog was very likely the opponent's trump card, the trump card that could kill Du Mu. Even though Du Mu's cultivation level was much weaker than theirs, Du Kai was still able to beat him like a dead dog, let alone Du Wei, who had a higher cultivation level. However, he did not dare to boast that he could swallow the lightning bolt in one gulp. Lightning was so violent that if he swallowed it, his stomach might explode. Du Wei swayed her serpent tail and soared into the sky from the city wall. She floated in the air and faced the grinning Blackie from afar. Her head full of purple hair fluttered in the wind. A smile appeared on her charming face, adding to her charm. The waves on her chest rose and fell, attracting the eyes. Under the restraint of the purple cloth, it seemed as if they were on the verge of bursting out. Interesting. Du Kai, why is your lightning so weak? You can't even deal with a dog? Du Wei raised her slender finger and smiled charmingly. Du Kai's eyes widened and he shot a glance at Du Wei. The muscles on his body bulged and his head of blue hair fluttered. More and more majestic lightning gathered on his body. It was as if his entire person had transformed into a bolt of lightning. With a sizzling sound, Du Kai once again threw out several lightning-long knives. This time, the target of the long knives changed and went straight for the thunderbolt-swallowing fat dog. Blackie rolled its eyes. The densely packed lightning bolts that shot down made it snort in disdain. The taste of this lightning is too inferior. The texture is too bad. The Lord Go muttered in its heart. Then, it narrowed its eyes and opened its mouth. The dog's mouth suddenly became bigger and bigger, as if it had transformed into a ferocious, bloody mouth. Facing the sky full of lightning-long knives, the Lord Go let out a deafening bark. Woof! It was like the roar of the heavens and the angry howl of a ferocious beast. Monstrous air waves surged out and rushed toward Du Kai. Before the sky full of lightning-long knives could strike down, They were blown back by the dog's bark. Du Kai, who was floating in the air, suddenly narrowed his eyes. His body suddenly stiffened after the dog's bark. His mind trembled and he couldn't move a single step. The thousands of lightning-long knives flew back and slashed at his body. The immobilized Du Kai was ruthlessly slammed against the towering city wall, causing the city wall to shake. The sizzling lightning arcs scattered around Du Kai's body. A dog's bark defeated a supreme being expert. This dog. Did it become a monster? Du Wei's pretty face froze again. Her alluring red lips parted in astonishment. When the dog's bark rang out, the Serpentine Sovereign, who was deep in thought in the imperial palace, was shaken. She turned her head with a grave expression and looked outside the imperial palace. Her pupils shrank. The Serpentine Sovereign's heart skipped a beat when she heard the dog's bark. A bad premonition welled up in her heart. The source of the sound was outside the city. Could it be that Du Kai and Du Wei attacked at the same time? Could it be that the humans that she didn't care about had attacked the city? Yu Fu, who was chained in the resplendent imperial palace, heard the familiar dog's bark. Her beautiful eyes widened and her pretty face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. That's Black as bark. It really is Owner Bu. In that instant Yu Fu's heart was filled with joy. She couldn't help but feel like crying tears of joy. Outside the grand Serpentine city, a long rainbow was speeding toward it. A figure stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was elegantly riding on a sword. Suddenly, he heard a dog's bark coming from the direction of the grand Serpentine city. Wu Mu's elegant figure stiffened and his heart couldn't help but tremble. This dog's bark. Why was it so familiar? That terrifying existence. Shouldn't it stay in the imperial city? Why would it appear in the grand Serpentine city? Oh no. Dooley has never seen how terrifying that existence is. Damn it. I mustn't provoke it. Wu Mu's heart trembled. With a single thought, true energy gushed out of his body. Sword light immediately streaked across the sky and flew toward the grand Serpentine city. In the illusory spirit swamp, Wu Yunbai was riding on a spirit horse. This spirit horse was unexpectedly able to gallop across the soft swamp mud at an extremely fast speed. A dog's bark, which wasn't very loud, reached her ears, causing her to be stunned. This dog's bark seemed a little familiar, wasn't it? She couldn't help but imagine a lazy, plump dog walking like a cat. Just as she was lost in thought, she suddenly felt a pitch-black shadow above her head. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She subconsciously raised her head and her pupils abruptly shrank. Above her head was a gigantic metal warship that blotted out the sun and sky. An oppressive aura emanated from the warship, causing Wu Yunbai's entire body to stiffen. At the front of the warship, a figure stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He also saw her. His gaze shot down like lightning, as if it was about to tear through the air. Wu Yunbai felt a piercing pain in her eyes. She couldn't help but cover her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. The spirit horse had already been frightened by the majestic pressure and knelt down in the swamp mud. It didn't dare to move even an inch despite being stained by the muddy mud. Executive Feng proudly stood at the front of the warship and indifferently glanced at Wu Yunbai. A native of the training ground? A 7th-grade battle saint. Perhaps you know the location of the crystal mine. You can be my guide then. Executive Feng muttered to himself. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up and he casually waved his hand. Wu Yunbai opened her tearful eyes and her entire body froze. From the void, a gigantic hand that blotted out the sky suddenly slammed down. With a suffocating pressure, it grabbed her whole body and dragged her into the warship. Then, the warship rumbled and continued forward. The spirit swamp regained its peace. Chapter 388. The cold and arrogant Serpentine Sovereign calmly swept her gaze over everything. The Serpentine Sovereign's graceful figure appeared at the entrance of the imperial palace. Did you come here to make a joke? On the stone walls on both sides of the tunnel, there were some fragments of crystals. Those fragments reflected the sunlight and made the tunnel look rather hazy. He turned his head and looked at Du Wei and Du Kai. He furrowed his brows and said calmly, "Open the city gate. I will take Owner Bu to see the Serpentine Sovereign. There must be some misunderstanding here. We must resolve this misunderstanding to avoid unnecessary conflict." The corners of Bu Fang's mouth curled up. He shot a glance at Wu Mu but didn't say anything. Bang! Another vendor took out a rosy steamed lobster from the pot and peeled off its shell. The lobster meat was trembling and emitted a rich fragrance. Even though this tunnel was beneath the illusory spirit swamp, it wasn't damp at all. In fact, the air was a little dry, and the ground felt very solid when one stepped on it. The anchored ship was smashed by the terrifying waves, and wood splinters flew everywhere. Wu Mu wore a complicated expression. He had crushed the last talisman he left for the Serpentine Sovereign. He felt a sense of emptiness in his heart. Although Wu Mu was the villa master of the White Cloud Villa, he had great prestige in the Grand Serpentine City. If Owner Bu and the Black Dog were to cause trouble in the rear, the Grand Serpentine City wouldn't be able to withstand it. Baijan was taken aback. After listening to the Serpentine's description of the object, he couldn't make a judgment. He didn't know what the object hidden in the crystal mine was. The amount of crystals in the crystal mine shocked Baijan more and more. It seemed as if it was inexhaustible. Baijan's heart trembled. He was extremely shocked. Wu Mu nodded his head in satisfaction and led Bu Fang and Blackie into the Grand Serpentine City. The western part of the Grand Serpentine City is close to the boundless sea. Thus, the main ingredients of the Grand Serpentine City come from the sea. Many seafood and low-grade spirit sea beasts are caught and turned into fragrant ingredients, Wu Mu explained. It was perfect that Wu Mu was going to bring them into the city. That was hard to say. With such a powerful black dog as a companion, that Black Walk was definitely not something ordinary. She would not believe that this human did not have a powerful background. One after another, the enormous sea spirit beasts landed on the ground, creating a huge splash. The oceanic species experts on the backs of the sea spirit beasts revealed excited looks as they urged the sea spirit beasts to sprint forward. A blood-soaked figure fell from the sky and landed in the middle of the crowd. Bu Fang looked at Wu Mu, who was panting heavily as he landed in front of him, and a strange expression appeared on his face. The Serpentine Sovereign had crushed the sword talisman he had left for her. There was no doubt that something big had happened. Could it be because of Owner Bu? The energy in the crystal was circulating, like a resplendent diamond. It was too beautiful to behold. When Wu Mu saw that figure, his complexion changed. Moreover, from Wu Mu's expression, he seemed to revere that human. Baijan was also confused. Du Wei was very bold. Her chest, which was wrapped in a purple cloth, slightly heaved up and down. Then, she ordered people to open the city gate. Since Baijan couldn't understand what she meant, he decided to take a look inside. However, why would a crystal ball appear in the mine? The Serpentine Sovereign asked in a stern voice. Bu Fang originally wanted to order Blackie to blast open the city gate. However, he didn't expect that Wu Mu would suddenly appear. That was because there was a dazzling light shooting out from the depths of the mine. Wu Mu said with a smile. Why would a spirit beast appear in the crystal mine? What was he trying to do? An oceanic species expert, who wore a suit of armor and had blue skin covered with fine scales, had a meticulous expression on his face. Shouldn't you be staying in the Light-Wind Imperial City? Why did you come to the illusory spirit swamp to cause trouble? Why did Baijan suddenly get injured? Could it be that someone invaded the crystal mine? Sir, that primordial crystal mine discovered something peculiar. All of a sudden, Baijan's pupils shrank as he stared at the crystal ball. His heart palpitated. They were heading toward the Grand Serpentine City. Bufang nodded his head. Soon, they arrived at the majestic Grand Serpentine Imperial Palace. A huge wave rapidly approached them, and they finally reached the precipitous cliff. A sword light whistled through the air from a distant place. Baijan was riding on his sword, and hovered in the air above the crater. He continued patrolling the area. Just as he finished speaking, a sharp whistling sound came from the sky above the Grand Serpentine City. As soon as he entered the Grand Serpentine City, Bufang was slightly astonished by the majestic and prosperous city. Baijan. Compared to the light-wind Imperial City, the Grand Serpentine City was much more prosperous. The surrounding buildings were of a completely different style from the light-wind Imperial City. There were all kinds of peddlers who had set up stalls on both sides of the street. A red light shot out from the eyes of the spirit beasts, and they locked onto Baijan. The serpent men gathered there and discussed spiritedly. They stopped what they were doing and looked around curiously. When they moved aside, the glowing object appeared in front of Baijan. Wu Mu led Bufang up the slope, and they quickly arrived in front of the Serpentine Sovereign. Those high-grade crystals were extremely wonderful. They were the most beautiful things in the world for cultivators. When the Serpentine Sovereign saw Bufang, her green hair fluttered in the wind. Her eyes widened and her aura surged. It seemed as though she had just recalled something. When Baijan arrived, the serpent men quickly moved aside and created a path for him. He slowly raised his head. Baijan sheathed his sword and landed on the soft swamp. He slowly paced back and forth. The serpent men and the White Cloud Villa's people were busy working around him. The surrounding stone walls were covered with crystals, and the crystals made the surroundings look extremely gorgeous. Baijan continued forward. After walking for a long time, he suddenly slowed down. Impossible. It should be something even more serious. Du Wei, on the other hand, was quite meticulous. Could it be that this 7th-grade lad had some sort of background? The people in the mine were still bustling with activity. The serpent men were unceasingly digging out the precious high-grade crystals from the pit. Those crystals were glistening under the sunlight. Bufang calmly glanced at the Serpentine Sovereign. He had already met the Serpentine Sovereign in the 100,000 Mountains. Naturally, the Serpentine Sovereign had also met him. That was the black dog that even a 10th-grade divine expert was killed by him. Bufang had to persuade the Serpentine Sovereign not to provoke Bufang and that terrifying black dog. The appearance of the big crystal mine had an extraordinary significance for the White Cloud Villa and the Serpent Men City. It would definitely increase the power of the two great factions by another level. Ownerbu, if you have anything to say, let's enter the Serpent Men City and have a chat. We can sit down and have a good chat. It's you, the human lad who swallowed the 10,000 bestial flames. The huge wave rolled down and flooded the village at the bottom of the cliff. Countless houses were smashed into pieces by the huge wave in an instant. Du Wei and Du Kai looked at each other in dismay. The serpent men on the city wall were also dumbfounded. They followed the serpent man into the crystal mine. However, the illusory spirit swamp was huge. The surging seawater only lasted for a short while before it subsided. The ground seemed to tremble. Numerous oceanic species experts and oceanic spiritual beasts rushed out and rushed into the illusory spirit swamp in a single file. A serpent man whose body was covered in mud scuttled out. When he saw Wu Yunbai, he hurriedly crawled toward her. His face was filled with anxiety. On the side of the street there were many gourmet stalls. A serpent man was skillfully roasting oily squid. A rich fragrance wafted through the air. Sure enough, after taking a few steps, Bufang smelled all kinds of fragrances. The surging seawater gradually surged toward the illusory spirit swamp. Those things were bred in the crystal mine. They were definitely priceless treasures. They were 3 huge crystal balls. Their surfaces seemed as if they were made of crystals. However, they were not very smooth and full of bumps and hollows. Baijan furrowed his brows and patted one of the crystal balls. He discovered that the crystal ball was extremely solid. It was similar to a large crystal ball. All of a sudden, Baijan felt the ground tremble slightly. His mind trembled and he looked at the deep pit below him in puzzlement. Wu Mu didn't expect that Owner Bu would really appear here. Moreover, he was accompanied by that terrifying black dog. It seemed as if he was going to attack the Grand Serpent Men City. Illusory Spirit Swamp, the place where the crystal mine was located. Bufang was in high spirits as he looked around. Such a flourishing city would surely have many unique delicacies. The fragrance that filled the air made Bufang even more excited. The other serpent men were somewhat unwilling and puzzled. However, there was nothing they could do. He was riding on a deep-sea mantis prawn. The mantis prawn's numerous claws scratched the ground before it shot forward at an extremely fast speed. What the hell? You are the Villa Master of the White Cloud Villa, one of the top experts of the southern region. How could you be so respectful toward a mere 7th grade battle saint? The 3 crystal balls flickered with a dazzling radiance. A blurry figure gradually seeped out from the Yuan crystal wall. The figure was like droplets of water, quickly transforming into a peculiar beast-like spirit beast. His entire body was bathed in blood. His aura was weak and his body was covered with hideous wounds. He was the White Cloud Villa's supreme being, who was in charge of guarding the crystal mine. Baijan, the serpent man said anxiously. However, there was a trace of excitement in the depths of his eyes. The White Cloud Villa's Villa Master, Wu Mu, was a swordsman at the peak of the Supreme Being realm. His cultivation was extremely powerful. Even the Serpentine Sovereign might not be his opponent. How could such an existence suddenly appear here? As the waves receded, the oceanic species experts continuously walked out of it. Du Kai, who had just slid down from the city walls, was already convulsing his muscles. He wanted to rush back to the city walls, but before he could, Wu Mu appeared. Owner Bu, perhaps there is some misunderstanding? Let's talk peacefully. Don't fight. It's not good to fight. Wu Mu smiled as he spoke to Bufang. Or, did something happen to the crystal mine? Chapter 389. Just as Bufang was about to rush out, Bufang brat, you stay here by yourself. The Lord Go has something to do. Go and play around for a while. The atmosphere became slightly awkward. It seemed like Bufang had been abandoned by someone just like that. Why was Baijan here? Wasn't he in charge of patrolling the crystal mine? The water beside Bufang suddenly exploded and a mantis prawn waved its sickle-like claws. It rushed out of the water and swung its sharp sickle-like claws at Bufang. It wanted to cut Bufang into 2 halves. He looked at the mantis prawn as if he was looking at an excellent cooking ingredient. Just as he walked out of the main hall, a gust of wind with a fishy and salty smell blew over. It made his hair, which was tied up with a velvet rope, flutter in the wind. Yu Fu was taken aback. Then, she covered her mouth and laughed. She rolled her eyes at Bufang and thought that Bufang was just joking. It was indeed a crystal mine. However, this wasn't what Bufang cared about. Owner Bu, please wait for a moment. I will come back and continue our discussion after I finish my business. Bufang had experienced the might of the magic array cannon. It was quite extraordinary. The sea spirit beast was unexpectedly forced back by the magic array cannon and was unable to climb into the city walls. Seawater surged in from outside the city. The deep-sea mantis prawn waved its sickle-like claws and rushed into the Grand Serpentine City. When everyone heard Baijan mention the crystal mine, they suddenly understood. Did something really happen to the crystal mine? Bufang calmly nodded his head. He swept his gaze around the room and his gaze landed on the chains that bound Yu Fu. A beam of purple light shot over from afar. It was the Serpentine King, Du Wei, who had left with the Serpentine Sovereign. Yu Fu was extremely astonished. Mantis shrimps were also known as mantis prawns, or mantis shrimps, because the 2 claws on their heads were like the sickle claws of a mantis, and they had amazing attacking power. When Bufang heard Yu Fu's words, his heart instantly relaxed. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up, and he nodded his head. Green smoke curled around his hand, and then the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand. Small-headed deep-sea mantis prawns rushed out one after another. These deep-sea mantis prawns had different grades. Some of them were 4th or 5th grade, while some were 6th or 7th grade. There were also many 8th grade deep-sea mantis prawns. Bufang was shocked and turned his head to look outside the palace. "Take care of him first. Stay here and don't run around. I'll go out and take a look." It was a sea spirit beast that looked like a giant prawn. Monstrous waves suddenly swept over and fiercely collided with the city wall. Bufang's eyes lit up and he smacked his lip. The scalding hot oyster pancake caused Baijan's palms to feel a burning pain. His already pale face turned even paler. Boom boom. This sea spirit beast was extremely violent, and it fiercely collided with the Serpent Men City's city wall. "Why did they lock you up?" Bufang furrowed his brows and asked. However, the rich fragrance of the oyster pancake attracted Baijan's attention. "What's going on?" Bufang furrowed his brows and brought Yu Fu to the main hall. He looked at Baijan, who was still leaning against a pillar and trying his best to recover. Bufang turned his head and asked Yu Fu. True energy suddenly surged out of his body, and Bufang's figure burst out of the city. Bufang tossed the oyster pancake to Baijan and didn't pay attention to him anymore. Then, he slowly strolled around the main hall. The two Serpentine kings, Du Kai and Du Wei, looked at each other and followed the Serpentine sovereign out of the imperial palace. Yu Fu nodded her head earnestly. She had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. The guards and experts of the Serpent Men race were doing their best to resist the attack. The magic array on the city wall flickered, and light cannons were shot out from the magic array. The light cannons collided with the sea spirit beast's body, causing a series of explosions. The gigantic beast's scythe-like claws tore open a large hole in the wall of the Grand Serpent Men City. The stall selling barbecued squid and the store selling steamed lobsters were instantly submerged by the seawater. "Owner Bu, it's really you." Just as Bufang was about to rescue Yu Fu, compared to the attack power of the mantis prawn, the taste of the mantis prawn caught Bufang's attention. For a moment, mournful wails resounded throughout the Grand Serpent Men City. The seawater surged down and submerged the originally noisy street. Bufang tossed the oyster pancake to Baijan. Baijan, who was still in a daze, unconsciously caught the oyster pancake. The Lord Go said all of a sudden. A trace of excitement flickered in the dog's eyes, and saliva flowed out of its mouth. Bufang stepped on the water with an excited expression on his face. The deep-sea mantis prawn was an ingredient that could only be chanced upon and not sought after. Ear-piercing laughter came from above the wave. A large group of blue-skinned experts of the oceanic species rode the waves and looked at the Grand Serpent Men City, which was being tormented by the deep-sea mantis prawn. This sea spirit beast seemed somewhat familiar. At the very least, the magic array cannons on the city wall were destroyed by the impact and lost their effectiveness. Baijan coughed out blood and glared at Wu Mu. With great difficulty, he said, Manner master, Yuan crystal mine." However, after a long moment of silence, Yu Fu was the first to regain her senses and shouted excitedly. Her small face was flushed with excitement. Bufang was taken aback. He straightened his waist and looked at Blackie. He discovered that the black dog had turned into a black blur and disappeared at an astonishing speed. However, before Bufang could answer him, he flew up on his sword and took the lead to fly out of the imperial palace. This left a deep impression on Bufang. Some people were dumbfounded as they looked at the back of the figure that had shot out in shock and uncertainty. The speed of the deep-sea mantis prawns was extremely fast. Moreover, their momentum was extremely powerful. They crashed into the walls of the Grand Serpent Men City and almost destroyed it. I said that I don't want to become the successor. I just want to go back to the store and learn culinary skills from you. The Serpentine Sovereign didn't agree to my request and locked me up, Yu Fu said, feeling wronged. The deep-sea mantis prawns shot out of the sea and cut the fleeing serpent men in half. Blood gushed out of them. Judging from Baijan's appearance, nothing good had happened. The Serpentine Sovereign and Wu Mu were startled. They looked in astonishment at Baijan, who was lying on the ground and coughing up blood. His body was covered with numerous wounds and blood was flowing out of it. This was something unimaginable for Baijan, who had already reached the Supreme Being realm. Everyone was guessing what had happened. The complexion of the Serpentine Sovereign changed. Could it be that the experts of the oceanic species had already arrived? Crash! The entire imperial palace suddenly shook violently and everyone was unable to stand steadily. Bufang turned around and leisurely walked out of the imperial palace. However, Bufang didn't cower in the face of this murderous intent. Instead, he licked his lips and revealed an excited expression. Bufang looked at Baijan, who was lying on the ground and coughing up blood. He was slightly surprised. He naturally recognized Baijan, but he was astonished by his current state. At this moment, Du Wei's charming face was filled with killing intent. She looked at the deep-sea mantis prawn, which was unceasingly attacking the city. She angrily shouted and charged toward the deep-sea mantis prawn. Only Bufang and Baijan, who was lying on the ground and coughing up blood, were left in the imperial palace. There was also Blackie, the black dog, who was walking like a cat. However, the serpent men guards retreated in an orderly manner. Soon, the serpent men were forced to retreat into the towering imperial palace. Blackie was originally lazily staying by Bufang's side. Suddenly, the lazy dog's eyes narrowed and there seemed to be a beam of light shooting out from the depths of its eyes. With his true energy and supreme being cultivation, Blackie quickly stopped the rupturing of his skin and stabilized his injuries. He even thought of a name for the dish. It would be called braised mantis prawns. It seemed as if it wanted to climb into the city from outside. Blackie, the plump dog, was nowhere to be found. Bufang couldn't find him, so he left the imperial palace alone. Wu Mu's expression was incomparably grave as he looked at Bufang and hurriedly said, "While he was saving Yu Fu," Bufang earnestly said, "learning culinary arts from me is not a bad thing. Becoming my apprentice will give you a better future than becoming the Serpentine Sovereign." Bufang grabbed his hair to hide his embarrassment and turned his head to look at the surroundings of the imperial palace. The pungent smell of blood wafted out of Baijan's body. When the frightened serpent men were about to retreat into the imperial palace, a figure rushed out of the imperial palace and charged into the chaotic crowd. He stepped on the surface of the water and charged forward. Bang! Bufang was flabbergasted as he looked at the densely packed sea spirit beasts outside the grand serpentine city. As Baijan bit into the oyster pancake, a rich fragrance filled the air. Bufang couldn't help but lick his lips. He took out an oyster pancake and started eating it. The tender meat of the mantis prawn appeared in his mind. The salty taste of seafood made him excited. Bufang swallowed a mouthful of saliva and his gaze flickered as he looked at the mantis prawns. Bang! 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 What appeared before Bufang's eyes was an incomparably huge spirit beast. To be more precise, it was a sea spirit beast. An angry shout came from among the experts of the oceanic species, who were treading on the waves. Then, several figures soared into the sky and joined the battle. Du Wei, who was fighting against the gigantic supreme mantis prawn, was severely injured. She fell from the sky and crashed into the city, causing many buildings to collapse. It looked like a centipede, with densely packed long legs that were like steel blade. On its head there was a sawtooth-shaped sickle hand. Its compound eyes rolled around, and a tyrannical aura burst forth from its body. Bufang stroked his chin. The deep-sea mantis prawn. Wasn't this the legendary mantis shrimp? The Serpentine sovereign swept her gaze over Bufong with a profound gaze. However, she had something more important to worry about at this moment, so she didn't say anything to Bufong. She waved her serpentine tail in the sky and she shot forward, chasing after Wu Mu. Originally, Baijian had only tried to take a bite of the oyster pancake. However, as soon as he swallowed the pancake, his eyes widened. He felt as if there was a raging, flame-like true qi rising from his lower abdomen. He felt as if his body had recovered a lot of strength. Bufong took a stroll around the luxurious imperial palace and discovered a room. He pushed open the door and saw a beautiful figure inside. Yu Fu and Bufong stared at each other speechlessly. The Serpent Men guards also began to throw their spears. Most of the Serpent Men guards were around 4th grade battle spirits. Even though the spears they threw with spirit energy did not cause much damage to the Supreme Beast, they were still able to inflict some damage to it by accumulating enough spirit energy. The Dragon Bone Kitchen Knife was indestructible. With a casual slash, it cut the sturdy chain in half and rescued Yu Fu. Bufong spoke in a serious tone. Bufong looked at Baijian, who was coughing up blood and struggling to get up from the ground, leaning against a pillar. After hesitating for a moment, Bufong took out a steaming hot oyster bun from the system's dimensional storage. Who could injure Baijian, who was at the Supreme Being realm, to such an extent? Chapter 390. Illusory Spirit Swamp, Big Crystal Mine. At this moment, the swamp seemed to be boiling. The swamp mud became dry in an instant. Hazy steam rose continuously, causing the swamp mud to harden. Strange roars kept coming out from the deep pit, accompanied by miserable howls. The blood of many strong serpent men spurted out of the deep pit. It was a ghastly sight. Spirit beasts that seemed to be formed from crystals flashed with violent red eyes as they tore apart the serpent men in the deep pit. Formless roars came from their mouths. These spirit beasts were guarding the crystal mine, as if they were guarding something in the crystal mine. In the distant sky, several figures shot over, bombarding the air with crashing sounds. Wu Mu arrived on his sword with a solemn expression. He couldn't help but sigh when he saw the blood spurting out of the crystal mine. Serpentine Sovereign Du Li also arrived at the big crystal mine, swaying her serpent tail. This big crystal mine was jointly developed by the White Cloud Villa and the Grand Serpentine City. There were many strong serpent men and disciples of the White Cloud Villa inside. Now, the strongest experts of these two forces looked at the scarlet blood spurting out of the mouth of the mine with pale faces. They felt as if their hearts had been hammered by something. Damn it! What happened in the crystal mine? Wu Mu shouted angrily. He flew down on his sword and charged into the mine with boundless rage. The Serpentine Sovereign quickly followed. Behind her, the Serpentine King Du Kai hesitated for a moment before following. The moment the three of them entered the mine, the pores on their bodies constricted. Inside the mine, the pungent smell of blood permeated the entire mine. The ground was littered with broken limbs, broken serpent tails, and scattered heads. It was like a scene from hell. This scene was suffocating. Wu Mu was furious. The Serpentine Sovereign was also cold. They stared at the dark depths of the mine. There seemed to be a violent tremor. Then, spirit beasts that seemed to be formed from crystals emerged. The aura of these spirit beasts was extremely terrifying. In the sky above the illusory spirit swamp, an ice-cold metallic warship slowly approached. It floated above the steaming mine. Finally found it, Executive Feng looked down at the huge mine. Although the entrance was filled with the stench of blood, it could not conceal the excitement in his eyes. Many of the Grand Baron Sect's disciples behind Executive Feng were also watching in amazement and excitement. Suddenly, Executive Feng's pupils constricted. He saw a black shadow shoot past and land on the ground. His brows slightly furrowed as he focused his gaze and saw a pure black plump dog below the warship. The black dog strutted its elegant cat-like steps, seemingly very excited as it paced above the spiritual swamp. Its tongue flicked in and out, its saliva flying everywhere. Where did this fat black dog come from? Executive Feng was somewhat speechless. He only gave it a glance before withdrawing his gaze. A mere black dog was truly unable to attract his attention. However, in the next moment, Executive Feng felt his body stiffen. This was because when he swept his gaze across the area again, he was horrified to discover that the black dog that had been pacing above the illusory spirit swamp had disappeared. Not even a strand of dog fur was left behind. It was as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. What's going on? Could it be that my eyes are playing tricks on me? Executive Feng sucked in a breath of cold air and rubbed his eyes. How could a dignified divine physique echelon expert like him be playing tricks on him? Even he himself would not believe it if he said it out loud. Executive Feng shook his head and put aside the matter of the black dog that had mysteriously disappeared. His gaze once again fell upon the entrance of the mine. However, he was not in a hurry to enter. According to past experiences, every crystal mine is guarded by crystal beasts. Let's first send someone to explore and see how strong the crystal beasts here are. Executive Feng was silent for a moment. Then, he arranged for a 9th-grade Supreme Being from the warship to enter the mine. Since they had already found the crystal mine, the 3 crystal sources within it should not be able to escape. Buzz green smoke curled up and the golden dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in Bufang's hand. As he twirled the knife, the blade reflected a dazzling blade light and an invisible dragon's might burst forth from the golden dragon bone kitchen knife. In an instant, the body of the mantis prawn that shot out from the stream of water stiffened and the sickle-like claws that were slashing toward Bufang froze. Bufang licked his lips and waved the golden dragon bone kitchen knife. He immediately tore apart the mantis prawn's sickle-like claws. Then, he stretched out his palm and caught the sturdy mantis prawn in his hand. The mantis prawn's shell was covered with sharp thorns and it struggled unceasingly. It seemed as though it wanted to use its sharp thorns to hurt Bufang so that it could escape. It was a pity that Bufang was not someone who would be tricked so easily. The black turtle constellation Wak spun and appeared. Without even looking at it, Bufang threw the mantis prawn he caught into the Wak. The dragon's might suppressed the mantis prawn and prevented it from moving. Bufang exclaimed inwardly when he succeeded in his attack, and his movements became even faster. The surface of the water around him kept cracking. Then, one after another, mantis prawns leaped out of the water, dashing towards Bufang. Bufang narrowed his eyes and infused his true energy into the golden dragon bone kitchen knife, causing the dragon's might within the knife to soar. All of the mantis prawns that were leaping into the air were pressed back into the water with a splash. Bufang was very excited. He felt countless mantis prawns twisting their waists toward him. He walked on the water surface and swung the golden dragon bone kitchen knife casually. Every time it hit the water surface, a mantis prawn that couldn't move would be slapped away. The black turtle constellation Wak scooped up the mantis prawn. Pa pa pa. He walked on the water, slapped and captured mantis prawns all the way. This was a sudden contrast to the doomsday-like scene around him. It was somewhat comical. The Serpent Men city was in a mess at this moment. Almost all of the Serpent Men were wailing and retreating in the face of these tyrannical invaders. How could there be someone like Bufang, who would be so violent and unreasonable as to kidnap mantis shrimps? When the Serpent Men saw the mantis prawns, they were so frightened that they retreated. However, Bufang seemed to be afraid that he didn't have enough mantis prawns in his black turtle constellation Wak. The oceanic species experts, who were treading on the water, had their faces constricted. They looked strangely at the human lad who was capturing mantis prawns. Who is that lad? Nuku, go and kill this human for me. Release all the mantis prawn citizens he captured. An oceanic species expert, who was clad in scales, said to a sturdy blue-skinned oceanic species expert, who was brimming with explosive energy. "Just a lowly human. My lord, prepare to hear my good news." Nuku of the oceanic species expert roared. He shot down from the waves and charged toward Bufang, who was capturing mantis prawns. Nuku was an 8th-grade war god. He held a battle spear in his hand and charged toward Bufang. Bang! The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up. He stomped his foot on the surface of the water, raising the waves several meters high. With a thought, he took out a bottle filled with golden oil from the system's storage space. Every time he left the store, Bufang would prepare the ingredients necessary for cooking in case of emergencies. The bottle spun rapidly in Bufang's hand. The muscles in Bufang's palm trembled slightly, causing the bottle of oil to spin continuously. Strands of golden oil poured out like silk, sprinkling into the pile of mantis prawns in the black turtle constellation Wak. There seemed to be some other force within the black turtle constellation Wak that was suppressing these deep-sea mantis prawns, forcing them to scurry around. Swish, after the oil was sprinkled, it completely covered all the mantis prawns in the black turtle constellation Wak. Gurgle. These mantis prawns were a little confused. They had a bad premonition. They spat out the oil, spat out bubbles, and struggled in the Wak, trying to escape. Roar. Damn human lad, quickly release all the mantis prawns. Or else die. Nuku's blue skin suddenly swelled up, and his eyes widened like those of a dead fish. His cheeks spurted out seawater, and with a roar, he charged toward Bufang with the long spear in his hand. Bufang's excited mind suddenly froze, and he glanced at this plaything in confusion. The tip of his foot abruptly touched the surface of the water, and the waves shattered. Bufang's figure dashed out, and his chest swelled up, and his face became flushed. Then, he opened his mouth and spat out a golden flame. A ball of golden flame floated up, and with a loud rumble, it turned into a sea of fire, covering Nuku within. The scorching heat startled Nuku. In front of him was a sea of gold, and he couldn't find the human lad at all. All of a sudden, a whistling sound rang out. Nuku's heart jumped. He turned his head to look, and all he saw was a black shadow that covered his eyes, suddenly smashing toward him. Dong! With a muffled sound, Nuku felt as if the world was spinning, and his head was about to explode. His entire body fell into the water, sinking to the bottom. The black turtle constellation Wak spun, flying back to Bufang's hand. A ball of golden flame sprang out, drilling into the metal mouth under the Wak. Boom! Braised mantis prawns. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up, and the fire instantly surged. Inside the black turtle constellation Wak, the dumbfounded mantis prawns that were spitting bubbles suddenly widened their eyes. They began to move around randomly, causing the oil to splash everywhere. However, they were firmly suppressed by the black turtle constellation Wak. In just a short while, a wave of fragrance permeated the air from the Wak. Smelling the familiar aroma of the mantis prawns, Bufang suddenly felt a little hungry. With a thought, a jar of Iceheart jade urn wine appeared in his hand. Removing the clay seal, he poured the wine into the black turtle constellation Wak. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. In an instant, steaming hot air, accompanied by the aroma of wine and mantis prawns, surged out, rolling and rolling. The oceanic species warriors, who were riding on the waves, widened their eyes. Their minds were startled, and their mouths were trembling. That human! How dare he cook a mantis prawn citizen in front of us, the oceanic species? Damn it! Catch him for me! The oceanic species warriors angrily roared, causing the surrounding waves to explode. Many oceanic species warriors instantly felt their scalps go numb. They responded and chased after Bufang. Bufang held the black turtle constellation Wak, which was steaming hot. He was cooking the braised mantis prawns. The mantis prawns were about to be cooked. How could Bufang bear to be disturbed by these blue-skinned creatures? Hence, he broke into a run, stepping on the water surface as he sped away. In just a short while, he rushed out of the big city. As he ran, Bufong turned his head to look at the giant mantis prawn. He couldn't help but smack his lips. With such a big head, it must have a lot of meat, Bufong thought to himself. Unfortunately, this was a supreme mantis prawn. Bufong temporarily couldn't defeat it. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't let it go. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The 10,000 bestial flames beneath the black turtle constellation wok burned brighter. Then, the aroma from the wok became thicker and thicker. The giant mantis prawn's compound eyes widened, and its giant sickle-like claws slashed at the air. In an instant, the sound of air being torn apart resounded. Its numerous legs suddenly swung, and like a spring, it chased after Bufong. For a moment, the scene became somewhat strange. Bufong held onto the fragrant braised mantis prawn as he sped away. Behind him were the enraged oceanic species warriors and the giant mantis prawn that had gone berserk. The serpent men who were fleeing from the grand serpentine city were dumbfounded as they watched this scene unfold. Due covered her swollen chest. She looked at Bufong, who was running away while treading on the water surface. Her exquisite face seemed to be at a loss whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 391. Due stared at Bufong's back as he left. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She didn't expect the previously stern and arrogant human to be such a joker. However, when she thought about it, it made sense. A human who dared to attack the grand serpentine city alone with a dog, what else wouldn't he dare to do? Cooking mantis shrimps in front of the supreme mantis shrimps was a piece of cake. What an interesting human. However, she still had to thank him. Due's eyes suddenly turned cold. With a wave of her serpent tail, she stirred up huge waves and dashed into the imperial palace. Activate the defensive magic array. Blast these damned ugly things down for me. As soon as Due entered the palace, her furious roar spread to every corner of the palace. The serpent men who were hiding in the palace felt the ground shake. In the next moment, the waves around the imperial palace were automatically cleared. A pale green light circulated and soared into the sky. Numerous magic arrays appeared around the serpent men's imperial palace. Even the air was filled with them. Due's purple hair fluttered behind her. Her eyes were ice cold and her red lips curled up into a cold arc. In the next moment, her will connected with the numerous magic arrays. The magic arrays facing the oceanic species army suddenly glowed. One by one, the magic array cannons were activated and shot out resplendent rays of light. As Bufong ran, he couldn't help but sniff the air. The braised mantis shrimps in the black turtle constellation wok became more and more fragrant. The fragrance was so rich that it made Bufong salivate. Seafood such as flower crabs and mantis shrimp were really fragrant when braised in oil. It was even more fragrant than the egg-fried rice in Fong Fong's little store. Due to the difference in the quality of seafood, when braised in oil, the aroma of the fats was completely released. It was so appetizing that people couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Bufong took large strides as he rapidly trod on the water. The amount of seawater in the illusory spirit swamp was increasing and was almost completely submerged. The water level had also reached a meter high. If Bufong did not use his true energy to support himself, he would soon sink into the water. This environment was very unfriendly for Bufong, but for the oceanic species powerhouses and the supreme mantis shrimp that were chasing after him, it was wonderful. Compared to humans, the oceanic race's experts were a bit ugly. Their faces were like blue-skinned fish that had turned into humans. Their eyes were round and ferocious, their mouths were big and flat, and there were cheeks on both sides of their heads. His fingers were webbed, making him look like a giant fishman. Some of them even had a blue fish tail covered in scales growing out of their buttocks, which was quite strange. At this moment, the oceanic species experts were looking at Bufang with anger. Bufang was cooking the mantis prawns without any scruples. He was simply looking down on the oceanic species expert. Hiss hiss. The supreme mantis shrimp also let out a deep hiss. Waves surged up to the sky, and its densely packed legs moved around, causing its huge body to shoot forward at high speed. It quickly shortened the distance between it and Bufang. Just when it was not far from Bufang, the supreme mantis shrimp's eyes widened, and its two scythe-like claws suddenly shot out. It was so fast that no one could catch its trajectory and speed. The air seemed to be torn apart at this moment. Bufang's body, which was holding the black turtle constellation walk, suddenly became cold. He felt an ice-cold killing intent shrouding his heart, which had been stirred by the aroma of the braised mantis shrimp, and it suddenly became tense. Bang! True energy surged, and the water under his feet suddenly burst out with towering waves. Bufang's figure shot up into the sky. The supreme mantis shrimp's two scythe-like claws fiercely swiped down. Another explosion occurred, and two huge craters appeared where Bufang had been. The waves were still swirling in the craters. What a strong and powerful scythe-like claws! This mantis shrimp definitely has meat, and the taste is definitely delicious. Bufang flew in the air and praised. As he floated in the air, the oceanic species expert gradually closed the distance between them. An 8th-grade war god oceanic species warrior let out a roar. A trident appeared in his hand, and he suddenly shot it toward Bufang. Bufang took a deep breath, and with a thought, his true energy surged. The true energy in his body was greatly consumed, and the black turtle constellation walk suddenly expanded at this moment. The patterns on the surface of the black turtle constellation walk seemed to have come to life, and a golden radiance surged. The black turtle constellation walk, which was as big as a small mountain, was fiercely thrown out by Bufang. When the trident hit the black turtle constellation walk, it was naturally bounced off. It couldn't even move the black turtle constellation walk. The few oceanic species warriors instantly sucked in a breath of cold air. What the F***ck was that? The black turtle constellation walk whizzed toward them. At this moment, the oceanic species warrior's dead fish eyes suddenly widened, and he raised his palm to slap the black turtle constellation walk. With so many oceanic species warriors attacking together, they were full of confidence. However, when their palms touched the black turtle constellation walk, the group of oceanic species warriors' faces instantly became extremely ugly. Sizzle! Sizzle! Waves of meaty aroma burst out, and the oceanic species warriors' faces twisted. Miserable howls came from their mouths, and their eyes were full of fear. Hot! Extremely hot! The black turtle constellation walk was burning with a heaven and earth obsidian flame. Even if it didn't burst out with a powerful force, the black turtle constellation walk was still burning, and it wasn't something their bodies could withstand. These oceanic species warriors felt as though their palms were about to be roasted, and the webbing of their palms was so hot that it was torn and curled up. However, what made them even more frightened was that the black turtle constellation walk was still crushing toward their bodies. This F***king. Such a scalding walk. Sizzle! Sizzle! Accompanied by waves of meaty aroma, countless oceanic species warriors fell from the void, howling miserably. They fell into the water below, and steam rose from the surface of the water. Bufang looked at this situation in shock. He didn't think that the scorching black turtle constellation walk could have such an effect. He had discovered a new way to use the black walk. With a thought, the black turtle constellation walk shrank, flying back to Bufang. With inertia, the steam in the walk surged along with the aroma. A mantis shrimp that had been cooked until it was red-hot flew out from the walk. Oil splashed in the air, and the aroma filled the air. Bufang's eyes instantly lit up. "It's you, the braised mantis shrimp." Green smoke curled up, and the golden dragon bone kitchen knife appeared. Bufong used the knife to catch the mantis shrimp that had been braised until its shell was bright red. The entire mantis shrimp was curled up, and steam was rising from it, and the aroma filled the air. Bufong's knife shook, and the mantis shrimp flew into the air. With a twist of the knife, the mantis shrimp's tail was cut off, and a small opening was revealed. A faint juice dripped down from it. Bufong covered his fingers with true energy. He pinched the mantis shrimp, and with a hook of the knife, he pulled it open. With a tearing sound, the mantis shrimp's shell was torn open by Bufong. What was left was the white and tender shrimp meat. The braised shrimp meat was really fragrant. The meat was tender and steam was dense. Bufong swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Pinching the head of the shrimp, he took a big bite of the meat. The tender shrimp meat entered his mouth, and his eyes lit up. It was as if an indescribable feeling flowed into his heart. The shrimp meat was full of elasticity, and as it bounced between his teeth, the aroma filled the space between Bufong's mouth and the tip of his nose. The freshness of the seafood and the aroma of the ice-heart jade urn wine spread together, intoxicating him. The spirit energy contained in the mantis shrimp meat flowed down from Bufong's throat, and it was as if his entire body had been cleansed. "So delicious!" Bufong exclaimed, intoxicated. With another bite, all the shrimp meat was scraped into his mouth, and he enjoyed this delicacy that made his body and mind happy. Hiss hiss. Smelling the fragrance of the meat in the air, the anger in the eyes of the supreme mantis shrimp became even more intense. The spirit energy in its body surged, and its sickle-like claws tore through the air once again, slashing toward Bufong. Its body was like a spring, charging toward Bufong. With a wave of the black turtle constellation walk, it smashed toward the supreme mantis shrimp. With a bang, the huge force of the mantis shrimp's attack actually sent the black turtle constellation walk flying. Bufong was startled. Another mantis shrimp shot out from the walk, and Bufong caught it in his hand. Dragging the black turtle constellation walk, Bufong turned around and ran without another word. The instantaneous explosive force of the supreme mantis shrimp was indeed terrifying. There was no benefit in fighting it head-on. Moreover, the most important thing now was to savor the taste of the braised mantis shrimp. Eating the braised mantis shrimp while being chased by the supreme mantis shrimp was so king exciting. Pa pa pa. Bufong stepped on the water once again, and the true energy in his body surged as he sped away. However, his hands were not the slightest bit sluggish. With a slap of the kitchen knife, the mantis shrimp flew up. Bufong chopped off its tail, and with a casual pull, the shell was peeled off, revealing the white and tender flesh that was still bouncing. As the fragrance assaulted his nostrils, Bufong took another bite. His mouth watered, and as he ate, Bufong's mouth was filled with oil. His face was filled with enjoyment. While Bufong was enjoying himself, the supreme mantis shrimp chasing after Bufong was not so happy. Its numerous legs were constantly flapping as it chased after Bufong. Just as it was about to catch up, a black wok smashed toward it. The hot and heavy wok made it a little dazed. That damned human took the opportunity to pull out another one of its little treasures and started to feast on it. The mantis shrimp was about to go crazy. Just like that, a human and a shrimp chased each other, gradually getting further and further away. As for Bufong, he was unknowingly heading toward the crystal mine. Waves surged up into the sky. Several figures were treading on the waves, releasing a tyrannical aura. In the sky, a huge metal warship was floating. Executive Fong, who was standing on it, clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the figures treading on the waves. "Oceanic species experts?" Executive Fong muttered. From those figures, Executive Fong could feel an extremely terrifying aura. The intensity of that aura was comparable to his. It was obvious that the other party was also a 10th grade divine echelon divine physique echelon expert. His physical body was tyrannical, and his blood and energy were like a rainbow. Could it be that the oceanic species target was also the big crystal mine? Executive Feng instantly furrowed his brows. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up, and the energy in his body surged like a raging wave. With a loud rumble, he confronted the oceanic species divine physique echelon expert who was treading on the wave. The oceanic species divine physique echelon expert opened his eyes and looked at the metal warship in the sky with a solemn expression. Just as the two of them were confronting each other, a violent explosion occurred in the crystal mine's entrance. Boom! Several loud explosions resounded, and several figures in a sorry state dashed out from within. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.